Flynn, and I'm sure other colleagues will be coming in as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to the lead sponsor, Councilor Edwards.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for being here this afternoon. This hearing, I think, is part of several important conversations we've had about housing, displacement, and actually creating the resources we need to assure that this is an affordable city for all Bostonians. We are struggling with that. That is a matter of fact. We are struggling to keep people here in Boston who are not very, very rich. We are struggling to keep people in our communities economically diverse and racially diverse. And so this is an attempt to provide yet another tool in the toolbox to assure that the city officials who are working extremely hard in trying to prevent displacement have the resources they need. I want to really emphasize the fact that the city has created many different tools, but all of them need funding. The Acquisition Opportunity Program, the Landlord Guarantee Program, Home Buyer Assistance Program, these are all programs, and as well as the Accessory Dwelling Unit Program, are all creative ways in trying to think of a means to create more housing that's more affordable. But even as we are creating these new streams and these, I guess, straws that we are dipping into our neighborhood housing trust, the resources aren't there to fully maximize all of those programs to the extent that we need to assure that this city is affordable. Today we're building at the top to free up space for the middle class and for folks who need deeply affordable units. I said this on the first day that I spoke in the council, and I'll say it again, we cannot build our way out of a housing crisis. We need to assure that the housing that we are building is for the segment that needs it the most. So what I'm saying is we should not be assuming that by building luxury housing, somehow we're going to assure that people who are deeply impoverished will have a place in Boston. More luxury units means people who can compete in that market have more choice. It doesn't create more choice for those of us who cannot compete at that market. It doesn't create more family homes. It doesn't assure that this is a middle class and growing city. But it does, unfortunately, to this day, is the only way in which we're getting a lot of the resources, such as linkage and IDP. Ironically, we have to build a lot in order to get some of those fees to go into our neighborhood housing trust to pay for affordable units. And I'm asking that we think bigger. I'm asking that we think of another way to assure that when the sales of these luxury units are happening, we also can reap some of those benefits. Because God knows in our communities, we have seen some of the devastating effects of that. It is not simply that someone transfers a $2 million home and nothing happens. In many cases, tenants are evicted. In other cases, especially with flipping, we have seen not only folks be evicted after the purchase, but also when the shoddy work has happened to maximize profits, we've seen walls fall down and people be homeless for over a year in my community in East Boston. We're talking about a serious issue, and while we may disagree on the numbers or the impact, the reverberating causes of flipping is not good for any neighborhood. People know there's money to be made. That's why you hear "we buy ugly houses" on the radio all the time. Boston's up for grabs and Boston is up for sale. That is not a Boston that I am going to continue to allow. That is a Boston I am not going to allow to be continually exploited for the economic gains of many people who do not live here. The numbers are very clear. We are a tenant city. I say that as a landlord, but 65% of us rent, so 65% of us are at risk for displacement, 65% of us are at risk for eviction. So as elected officials, the vast majority of who we represent are tenants. And while I am a landlord and I understand the impact of ownership on my personal life, allowing me to have access to the middle class and be the first person in my family to own a home, that pathway is becoming narrower and narrower for people who've been here their entire lives. So I want to say that this transfer fee is the beginning of a conversation, and I believe there's a solution in this. We may not agree on the 6%. We may not agree on the $2 million in terms of where we're going to set this. But we should all agree we have a speculation problem in Boston. We do not have the resources to counter it. We do not have enough affordable units, and this is yet another tool that we should consider quite seriously. And I have no problem saying that flipping is not good for a neighborhood, and that we should do everything we can to curtail that, or at least to get the benefits from it before they have devastating effects in our neighborhoods. We need help, we need resources, and linkage and IDP is not doing enough, no matter how much we think we're increasing it. So I'll end my comments there because I have plenty of questions, but I wanted to thank the co-chair for this. I know this is a double header for you, for my co-chair, and also for the hearing sponsor, or excuse me, the chair of the committee. They just did a 4-hour hearing on cannabis, and I want to thank them so much for having the energy to keep up today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Redwood.
Well, that remains to be seen. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I certainly want to thank Councilor Edwards for your extraordinary leadership on this issue and for your partnership on this important piece of legislation. Also want to give a shout out to many of the housing rights activists that are with us today. Thank you for your activism and your engagement. One of the reasons that I decided to run for City Council in the first place was because of the stark contrast between Boston's booming economy and the struggles that many families and seniors have when it comes to being able to afford to stay in the city of Boston. The lack of inclusion and the economic opportunity means that people are being pushed out of their communities, as well as the housing crisis that we have. We saw at my hearing on displacement and gentrification in Roxbury back in November, as well as Councilor Edwards' hearing on speculation in the housing market, that the housing affordability crisis is at a boiling point. Despite the mayor's work to create more housing and the goals set in the Housing Boston 2030 plan, not enough has been done in terms of creating affordable housing for those who need it most. Rent prices continue to increase. Luxury condos continue to be built and are sold at astronomical prices that are unaffordable to the residents in this city. The Institute for Policy Studies' Towering Excess report shows that many of these issues exist and how we might solve some of those. This legislation seeks to discourage the rapid secondary sales of homes. While flipping may sound like it can improve a neighborhood, what we see is that it really can displace residents with the increase of rents, as well as having work that may not be done the way it should be done to ensure that the house will be safe and secure. So we don't want lower quality work when we know that will happen when it's not the person who intends to live there. We have right now before us the opportunity to generate hundreds of millions of dollars per year for affordable housing. Currently, the main source, as you already heard, is the Neighborhood Housing Trust, and that's through the linkage fees. And these fees are helpful, but it's not enough. It's insufficient when it comes to really addressing the housing affordability crisis in our city. Our legislation will add important tools to the city's toolbox in dealing with this crisis. It will allow the city to slow down the explosion of luxury condo sales and rapid flipping happening in our neighborhoods. And rather than do that, invest in more affordable housing opportunities for the residents who live here. This legislation provides an opportunity for a great deal of flexibility with exemptions for owner-occupants and people who've gone through the home buyers program here in the city, and transfers between family members. And there are many other options as well, but I'd rather get right into the hearing and our questions. I thank the panel, all the panels who will be before us today. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Janey. We've also been joined by our colleague, City Councilor Frank Baker. So we're going to get right into it with the administration panel. So we're going to start with, we have Emma Handy here, Chief Financial Officer and Collector Treasurer, joined by Gail Willett, the Commissioner of Assessing Department, joined by Nick Arenello, Director of Tax Policy and Assessing, and also by our Chief of Housing and Director of Neighborhood Development, Sheila Dillon. So we'll start with Emma, and I guess I'll defer to you on, we should write down those. Very good.
Great. Thank you, Chairman Flaherty and members of the City Council. I want to thank Councilors Edwards and Janey for sponsoring this hearing and convening us to discuss shared priorities of Mayor Walsh and the City Council. I will be very brief because I think our intention today is to be here to answer questions that you have, but also to express our commitment to the goals of this home rule in building more affordable housing in the City of Boston and helping our residents to stay in their homes and in their neighborhoods. We are interested in the concepts that Councilor Edwards and Councilor Janey have introduced in this home rule petition, and we look forward to working together to further solutions that will allow us to achieve these goals. I think, like I said, we'll be brief because we want to move on and take your questions, and I'm happy to answer whatever ones you have.
Very good. And then, anyone additional? Good, very good. Well, first question to Nick. Are you related to Dave? Dave Aronella from East? Is he?
No.
Wonderful guy. He's
no
the
relation.
chief probation officer over there. He's helped more people in the city, but particularly East Boston. So I saw Dave Aronella. I didn't know Nick Aronella. I thought you might have been related to him.
No, I get that question a lot, though.
Yeah, he's a super guy. Can you, I guess from the administration, can you provide an overview on what the current funding and mechanisms are for the Neighborhood Housing Trust?
Sure. The sources of funding, Counselor, or what we can spend them on?
Yes.
Oh, so the linkage is a product of extracting money from commercial development. We get so much per square foot, over 100,000 square feet, and that money goes into the Neighborhood Housing Trust to create affordable housing, and it goes into our jobs programs. The lion's share of it goes for affordable housing. It can be used for the production and preservation of affordable housing, both new construction and renovation.
And so we currently have how much in the Neighborhood Housing Trust Fund, if you will?
I want to say we've got roughly, and I can get you the exact number, I didn't come with that, about 10 million right now that is not spent or committed. And I know that the trust is meeting Thursday to talk about new strategies and projects. But pretty much when the money comes in, we spend it very quickly. Money doesn't sit there, it doesn't accumulate. We really are very anxious to get the money on the street as soon as we get it.
Okay, and if from the administration's perspective, so if this home rule was to pass, I guess, do you understand what your duties would be and who would be doing the collecting and issuing the certificates and the reporting and the fees and the fines and all that stuff? So
Yeah.
if it were to pass, how do you envision that kind of?
The linkage program is very well run. It's Treasury, right now the BPDA does the documentation with the developers. Treasury collects the funding, and the money that comes to the Neighborhood Housing Trust, it's well-staffed, and we put the money out in a very transparent way. Every project is carefully underwritten to make sure that we're putting the least amount in to make sure that, to make the projects feasible. So the mechanisms we have in place for linkage, they work well.
Very similar to the community preservation funds?
Yes, much older program, so it's a little more seasoned, but yes.
So I was just going to add that in addition to NHT, with the successful passage of the Community Preservation Act, we obviously have a significant infusion of funding that is to be used in part for affordable housing. The most recent round that you all approved, thank you very much, had about $18 million to create or preserve affordable housing. Councilor, I think part of your question is about, with the new responsibilities introduced in the Home Rule Petition, which city department would be overseeing that and where would that live? I will let Gail and Nick talk more about this in terms of the details, but the oversight of sale transactions and sort of point of sale tax or fee collection currently does not exist in a city department today, so this would be a new responsibility and a new function. I think it's something that we would have to think about. The assessing department obviously is where we do a lot of analysis and information gathering and have a good sense of real estate transactions in general, but those are primarily sort of a historical view because we use values from a prior year in order to set things like our property tax rates.
Okay.
So for assessing, we're always looking a year back. So the fiscal 19 bills that are out now are looking at what happened during calendar year 17. I think part of the issue that we've been talking about with this is looking at things now, which is something the assessing department doesn't do, and trying to figure out what kind of sales these are and how these sales would be defined. So I think that the administrative piece would be a very heavy lift. I'm not sure that it sits in our department. I don't know where it would sit. I know for us, with us looking back, the idea of looking at what's happening in the market now is just against everything that we're doing. I think the other thing is it's something that is very time sensitive and something that would require a lot of research. You'd have to know what kind of sale, who the parties are, what is happening, and be able to do that in a very short time so that it is not interrupting the flow of a sale. These mortgage locks are a limited time period, usually 60 days. And my guess is this would be around the same time period as an MLC certificate. So this would be at the end of the process. And so I think it would be very I think it would be very hard, a very heavy lift for any department to do.
So I think the commissioner just referenced municipal lien certificates. Those are a function of the collecting department, which is also an A&F department. And those are really, I guess, a retrospective of property taxes owed. So it is a part of the process that we are involved in, but it's sort of using the data that we currently are responsible for in terms of property tax collection.
Okay. And then on the same token, so we've accounted this before, whether it was through the rental inspection, whether it was through the Jim Brooks stabilization, or whether it was through sort of the short-term rental Airbnb, it's in terms of like sort of being able to collect the data and also be able to track and have the tracking technology around these types of real estate transactions. So do you guys have that type of equipment and technology, and are you equipped to handle that type of flow again if this home rule were to pass?
Today, we are not. That's just not how our system is set up, because as the commissioner said, this is our property taxes are a retrospective look at prior year value. We don't do a real-time sort of market analysis in terms of the responsibilities currently charged to A&F departments broadly.
Right. And then situations now, like for example, when you bought a home, say like 10 years ago, and you have a mortgage that has the property tax are escrowed, just given just where property tax have gone, I assume that you have some type of system, because the anticipated payments when you sign up for your loan, I think I'm hearing now it's almost out the window, because the property taxes have increased to the point where the mortgage company that underwrote the loan or the bank that underwrote the loan never envisioned that. They factored that into your payments over the terms of your loan, and they're now realizing that the escrow payments aren't even, they're falling short of what the actual tax payment is. So I'm assuming that you guys are tracking that data as well and providing that information to creditors and lenders and things of that nature, right?
Yes, I can only speak from personal experience, but in my particular instance, my escrow has changed. So I think if to the extent that an escrow didn't change and somebody was short on their property tax payment, the collecting department would communicate that. They oftentimes batch things to lenders, but they also would communicate that directly to the taxpayer if that resulted in a shortfall on the property tax payment.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Edwards, any questions this time?
Thank you so much. So I think I thought it was really important to talk about the process if this were to happen. But, we've kind of had this conversation before where I felt that so much of the criticism of the process was put before whether the idea makes sense or not. So I think today I really want to stay focused on whether the idea makes sense or not. I also think that there's two key stakeholders we're missing in this process conversation. That's the BPDA, who is, I think, working with and getting and assesses the linkage, and then also the Neighborhood Housing Trust. So in my idea of the process, you would not, or your department would not be involved, because you're right, you do look back. Your job is to assess taxes. Those two are dealing with current sales. Linkage is dealing with a current sale that I believe is paid upon certificate of occupancy of the building and then allowed up to 7 years for that money to come in. We have a process then to collect fees. It's just that the stakeholders who are in charge of that are not sitting in front of us. So that I want to make clear. I completely, again, agree. If we're talking about a tax process that deals with immediate taxes coming in, it wouldn't make any sense, because you do have to do a deep analysis and you do the assessment. But I do wish the administration had the BPDA here and a representative from the Neighborhood Housing Trust. I am a member on it, but I feel like I'm a little conflict of interest to both say that we can do it and also we should receive the money. So I just want to note that discrepancy, because I think your criticisms are well-founded if you were going to assess the fee. So just note that. So now we have a process where fees are based off of current sales, where we allow for a payment process after certificate of occupancy for the linkage fees to then get back into the Neighborhood Housing Trust over 7 years. And there's enough criticism about how we allow for so much lag time between, that process and not. And I'm sure at some point somebody's going to ask for an accounting to make sure that everyone's caught up in their linkage payments, because we don't, those are one of those things. So that process exists. What I wanted to also do was check in about the programs that I mentioned, which are successful. The Acquisition Opportunity Program, Sheila, is one of the most successful programs, even in East Boston. Yep. And my understanding is that for that to be to even get to the goal of 1,000 units, and for those who don't know, the Acquisition Opportunity Program allows for CDCs or nonprofits to purchase triple-deckers at market rate. So no one's hurt by this. You're just buying it for the price that the owner wants. with the tenants in there. They're seeking out buildings with tenants currently there to keep them in place so that it's run by a nonprofit to make sure that we are keeping people in place. It's a successful program. My understanding is in order to get 1,000 units by 2030 in that program, we need $7 million a year in order to fund that.
I just did the math, 6.2, but you're close.
6.2, we'll round it down. It's still per year.
Yeah.
Do we have it?
We have had it so far the last couple of years.
But we've had it through a combination of CPA funds, this fund, that
Yes.
fund. We managed to cobble it together.
Right.
But in the Neighborhood Housing Trust Fund right now was $6 million, or $10 million about.
Yes, and CPA just authorized $5 million, thank you very much, that we can use on the AOP program.
Right.
We're all in agreement that this is a fabulous program that needs to be brought to scale, and we also need to talk to our state partners, too, about, a fund that they could set up as well. But we do need, to meet our 1,000 units, we do need $6 million per year.
And I'm happy with that goal. I just think 1,000 is even too little. Again, we're buying at market rates, so that is not enough to stabilize a lot of our communities. So I guess, moving on to then other successful programs, if you looked at all the programs that you are implementing, homeowner down payment assistance, looking at the AOP, looking at potentially trying to purchase expiring use buildings, of all those programs that the city is, kudos to you guys. You're doing everything you can. It seems to me we don't have the money to fully implement them and to bring them to scale.
We have the money to meet our goals that we've outlined in the housing strategy.
How much would that be?
We're spending about $50 million a year, and $50 million to create and preserve the affordable housing that we need. And there's a little spillover into some housing programs, but about $50 million per year, made up of federal funds, City of Boston funds, extractions from private developers, et cetera. We could always do more. We are limited by our budgets, but there's no projects coming into us right now that we feel like we can't fund because we don't have the money.
What about the redevelopment of Bunker Hill? Or any of the other redevelopments? We do not have the money.
Right. We're finding solutions for those as they come in, but you're right. I think no one would disagree that that we couldn't do more if we had more resources. No one could disagree with your counselor. We are receiving more than we have in the past, so we are doing more with that money.
But all of the money, at least, even I guess you can argue CPA, right? That's based off of home ownership and property owners. I would say that's a great example of all of us, all levels of income, coming in and contributing to affordable housing. So I think that's Boston. That's what we do. We rally together. But I think that there's a concern that there's so much money left on the table. Let's look at the Seaport and the amount of just buying and selling, not occupying, and the amount of hundreds of millions of dollars made off of doing nothing really for the city of Boston, and nothing to help house. They were just, it was a money grab. It was disgusting and gluttony, I'll call it that. And we got none of it, besides maybe in property taxes. We got none of it. Hundreds of millions of dollars. And they bought and sold some of our housing stock and land like it was a new stock market, and we got none of it. This fee would have, if assessed, would have gotten us hundreds of millions of dollars, which would have certainly helped to bring all of those programs to scale. I think I'm really just wanting to understand, besides cobbling last minute and trying to pull together everything else, if we can't do that, these programs aren't going to be funded. Am I correct?
Well, the programs are funded. It's just, I think your question or your comment was to what scale. I must say that the administration, we share the idea that we need additional resources in our critical programs. We are working hard with you right now in many of the room to increase the CPA match. We have a home rule that we want to see more flexibility with linkage so we can analyze to see whether we're extracting as much as we should. And the BPDA right now is actually hiring a consultant to look at the IDP program. So there is an ongoing effort always to see if we can increase resources responsibly. So the ideas here today we're interested in, we want to hear from the advocates, but we share the same goal that we need more money in affordable housing.
So tell me about flipping.
Yep.
And do you see it as a concern? In Boston,
About-
housing market, flipping.
On what?
Is it a
Flipping?
concern?
I don't have good data really on flipping. I don't know if, I don't have enough good data to know whether or not it's an issue.
Do we currently track secondary sales?
I can get back to you on that. I was looking at Bob Garrett.
I know, I was looking at Bob too. Do we track secondary sales? Okay, so just for those who didn't hear him, they do, I think, track or know about secondary sales. They don't necessarily know if they're all flips. And obviously, because we're defining flip in a certain way for the first time, right? You're
Right.
not tracking a 24-month period. So would it be good, or I think it might be helpful to start to track that?
Absolutely.
So that we can see what the flipping is or does look like. Has the administration, I know to the best, and I was there in the fight, with regards to evictions and tracking and seeing them going on, have you been able to monitor an uptick or downtick in evictions in this market?
So we've been monitoring evictions, not displacement, because there's no data on displacement. And as you
That
know,
I
a
know.
lot of people leave before they have to.
That I know.
Before they're asked to through the courts. So we have been tracking evictions. We are now analyzing 16 to 7, or evictions that started in 17 that were concluded in 18, and we should have that data soon. We're seeing steady numbers. We're seeing some unusual patterns, so we are looking at those more carefully. We're seeing slightly more evictions in subsidized housing, so we're looking at that. We want to understand that better. But there has been a slight decrease from 15 to 16, and then a more sort of steady numbers from 17 to 18. I can share those with you as soon as we're done our analysis.
Sure. And I just wanted to note, have you done any of the calculations for what a 6% transfer fee would bring in, if we were to bring that in based off of a $2 million sale limit?
Yes.
What did
I think we provided those numbers to you. I think the number was
based on what I have,
based on all sales with no exemptions.
Right.
I think the number was it 3 million? Oh, sorry, 300 million?
If we did it based off of just sales from 2018, the number is $420 million.
Okay.
$140 million if we were to do the 2% fee, which is
That's
what's
every
pending.
type of every single type
over
of
$2
real
million.
estate, commercial, industrial, mixed use, apartment buildings, everything thrown in, no exemptions.
Yeah. If we were to, for those who are curious, if we were to exclude and just only look at commercial and industrial, that's it. Based off of 2018 numbers, a 6% fee would have gotten $188 million. And I would think that those are numbers and monies that we certainly could use for the city of Boston.
So one of the things, Councilor, that we've asked ourselves as we've been thinking about the proposal and how it would work and what questions we might have is just how would we structure it in a way that would ensure that there was not tax avoidance activity that happened. So I think we've looked at the numbers with D&D. We understand the math equation of the 6% applied to the sales. One of the concerns we have about just being really careful in how it might be constructed is the greater the cost of the transaction, right? So something like a 6% transfer fee, which would be probably one of the higher ones nationally, the more likely people would alter their sales behavior in order to avoid paying the fee. And so I know you've raised the idea of could this be marginal or could it be graduated or something like that. I think a flat $2 million with raises, you know, as I said, in terms of the sort of math generated, the $300 million checks out, but I think we would be concerned about market behavior that would try to avoid that by either sort of adjusting sales prices to be below the tax, or trying to find other ways to maximize on things like an exemption or things like that. So those are some of the things that we, in thinking about this, think we have to sort of look into the data a little bit more and try to understand what levers might be meaningful and what might make people and organizations change behavior to try to avoid it.
Right. I mean, it's still more than nothing, which is what we're collecting right now, right? So even if there are some avoidance, I don't know that anyone's going to take that deep of a cut and cut their their sale price to less than $2 million to avoid a 6% fee. But I do think it's worth the conversation. There's other ways in which we should also think of exemptions to that fee. For example, one of the concerns I think the administration has expressed is the fact that that fee would be passed down to tenants, right? So if you did sell it for 6%, then I'll just make it up by raising everybody's rent. And I'm happy to say I'm willing to look at an exemption to that fee if they'll just implement rent control then, right after that. So if you want to make sure that your building is permanently affordable and deed restricted, then you can avoid the fee. I'm just not willing to give the wiggle room and the creative arguments to some of our opponents. If they really want to make sure tenants are able to stay in place, they certainly can, and I'm willing to help to avoid that fee to do that. I hope the administration is also willing to be that creative. I think also what's really important is to make sure that we're not alone in this. There's New York. Have you looked at that fee? In New York,
I have not,
mansion
Councilor.
tax, $1 million since 1989. DC, have you looked at their fees?
We've been looking at some of the other cities, yes.
And San Francisco. So when you looked at those cities, I found that they were not stopping a mass amount of development, and there wasn't a mass exodus of millionaires. So what were you looking for, and what did you assess when you looked at those fees?
So we've, like you, we've just been collecting the information on how other cities have been looking at this. I think one important thing to note is that oftentimes other cities have a very different tax structure than we do. Mm-hmm. Most other cities actually have other opportunities for resource and have beyond just property taxes, which is sort of, as you know, the bread and butter of how the city funds itself. And so trying to get a picture of holistically how that fee fits into their broader tax collection authority and what it might mean, I think is an important piece of that we are still looking into.
I'll save it, but again, if there's any way to get, I think, the BPDA or the NHT in here who are assessing and passing out fees, I think that would have been a great opportunity to have that conversation. I'll wait.
Thank you, Councilor Edwards. We've also been joined by our colleague, City Councilor Mark Siomo, City Councilor Matt O'Malley, and City Councilor Anissa Asabi-George. And I know that Chief Dillon had referenced the CPA, so it's appropriate to recognize the original CPA who's done a lot of work on affordable housing, which is the Chinese Progressive Association. So I know that Suzanne Lee is here, and Lydia Lowe and Karen Chen are here. So thank you for all you do on behalf of the city. So with that, Chair recognizes co-sponsor, City Councilor Kim Janey.
Thank you so much. I want to come back to the funding in terms of, the tools that we currently have, and how much funding would you say we need to really address the affordable housing crisis here in our city? So right now you're spending $6.2 million on the Acquisition Opportunity Program. How much more would we need?
I don't know if we've ever done the calculation of what we would need, because it's just such a large number. I'm not so sure. It's a fruitful exercise. We know that there are 54,000 units of affordable housing in the city of Boston. Our goal was to increase that to 70,000. But even with that very large number, probably one of the highest in the country as a percentage, we know there are still 20,000 households that are low income, that are paying more than their 50% of their income towards rent. We know that that a lot of people want to buy in Boston. We know that there's hundreds of families that are taking Home Buying 101. They want to buy in Boston, stay in Boston. We know that they need a product that they can buy. So it's a very, very large number. We could certainly do that analysis. I didn't come prepared to talk about it, but it's more certainly than we have funding for.
No, and I think it's important to do the analysis, because the need should inform then what we're actually doing. If we're doing something that's not informed by what we actually need to have in our city, then we're just kind of spinning our wheels. So I think it's important to kind of understand, what we have, what resources we currently have, what we need to kind of get at. Here's our goal. Here's where we need to be moving in terms of affordable housing being built in this city. What tools do you currently have to incentivize developers to kind of create the right mix of housing? I know in the Plan Deadly process anyway, there is good language around, a third, a third, a third. In terms of that, what other tools is the city using?
So you're right. Dudley is a good example of us using our assets, our land, to incentivize and put out RFPs that require mixed income developments. We're doing that all over the city. Anywhere we have land, the BPDA is doing that as well. We're putting out every bit of, when we get funding, we put it out for development. We're working with our nonprofits on acquisitions. We're working with our banks on better, lower interest mortgage products. We're developing a new down payment product, and so we're trying to create a lot of new opportunity. And at the same time, we're always trying to preserve the affordable housing that we have, including our public housing. So it's a massive effort to pull off what we've been trying to do for the last 4 years. We are a bit hamstrung. Even if we were to come up with a large influx of new money, to create 1 unit of new affordable housing is somewhere in the $400,000. So we really do rely on the state and federal government to offset some of those costs. So we can only produce as much as the state and the federal government will give us resources to do that. So so while we're trying to do as much as we can, we are relying on partners that have limited resources as well.
Right. And so as you go back and think about the need, the question around need, not just in terms of the number of units that would be needed, and affordable units, but also that dollar amount, I think that would be helpful. I have a lot of questions on flipping, as I hear you earlier from the questions from my colleague. I don't know if you have that data, but I would be very interested in just understanding what has been flipped in the last 5 years, what the average profit is for the flipper, and where these flips are happening, whether or not they're downtown, whether they're in different neighborhoods, and then how much time between each flip. So as you go back to get that data, that would be helpful for me.
I just want to say that on the flipping, there's probably some developments we could look at that are obvious. A new development is built, it's in good shape, someone buys a unit and then they resell it. There are also situations where even our nonprofits are buying derelict buildings in the neighborhoods, renovating them, and then selling them. So there's good flipping, and then there's flipping that's not as productive. So and the data doesn't provide that level of detail. So we could give you an aggregate number, but I don't think it will tell the full story.
So,
but we can think about that.
I just wanted to add a little bit of color in terms of what we looked at as we started to think about what this would mean based on the information that we have available to us within administration and finance. So we just looked at 1 year. You asked for 5, but we looked at fiscal year 18. In fiscal year 18, there were 3,700 Boston transactions that would be assessed the 25% fee. Of those transactions, 1,500 of them sold at a loss, and another 1,650 of them had a gain equal to their second sale price. And so we think that sort of the starting place of the 3,700 transactions in terms of what might actually need to be further winnowed to define a flipping transaction, and I think that's part of what our question is sort of how do you appropriately size that and define it. So of the 3,700, 550 sales, or about 4% of the total sale transactions could have possibly been speculative just based on sort of net gain or profit. So I think part of defining and narrowing that is just getting at some of the things that Sheila was talking about. We have the numbers. It's hard to get the qualitative data around that in terms of what does that actually look like and how do we define something that is speculative or flipped.
So how do you think the 25% would have impacted those flips that you're talking about?
So it's hard to say, but so for 3,200 of them, it would have been it would have either created a loss where there was none or would have created a further loss on the sale. And it's hard for us to see what the relationships are, what the reasons are, what's driving the sale, and to be able to define it as speculative or for profit is not there in that data for us yet.
All right. So I know lots of colleagues are here and have questions. There are a lot of people who may want to testify. I just, would end by saying clearly we need more revenue to deal with our housing crisis here clearly in terms of helping renters stay in their place, but also on the affordable home ownership opportunities. And I hope that we will move forward in such a way that we are considering all avenues and all tools that we can put in our tool chest so that we can address this crisis. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Janey. I know we have an aggressive agenda with 3 panels, 2 additional panels, and public testimony, so if I may ask my colleagues to be as succinct and also the answers as succinct, and maybe try to do a 4-minute clock to see if that works. So I'll start with our Council President, Andrea Campbell.
Thank you, Councilor Flaherty, and I'll be brief just to create adequate time for the other panels, and thank you to the city employees and panelists for being here. I know you guys have a tough job, so thank you for what you do every single day on behalf of the City of Boston. I also want to thank, of course, Councilor Janey and Councilor Edwards for the proposal. I think, you know, we are dealing with a housing crisis in the City of Boston. We are talking about it every single day. I was visiting with Metro Housing this morning, and there's some incredible work that we're doing, including you, Chief Dillon, but there is a lack of sort of funding for some of these ideas and proposals. I was proud to lead with Councilor Flaherty the charge around the CPA, the second CPA, not the original CPA in Chinatown. And at first that started as an idea, right, in a conversation. Not everyone was necessarily thrilled, but it then turned into something that we see is just remarkable in terms of the benefits of what we're seeing for historic preservation, parks, open space, and housing. So I applaud Councilor Janey and Councilor Edwards for the idea. I think I expected actually to learn or see more data with respect to the flipping to figure out what's the scope of the problem. I'm getting some emails even from folks within my district, and I know they've sent this to the councilors as well, looking at not just sort of these flipping or sales down in the downtown area, but how does this show up in neighborhoods, say in Dorchester, for example, where people may be doing the same behavior, and that's not necessarily a good thing in certain communities. So would love to see whatever data exists and what the gaps are, and even if you could just email that to us, that would be extremely helpful. I also want to just flag that, you know, and I think some of the letters that we've gotten speak to the need for new sources of public investment, for new money. I mean, we have these goals in the housing plan, but, you know, when it comes to our seniors and building housing for our seniors, we're behind track, or more housing for our veterans. And so the question is, how do we set these goals and remain on track? And if it requires more money, then we have to be open to different ideas. So I guess my only question for this panel is, I think we're hearing that there might be some unintended consequences with respect to some of the proposals, whether it's the transfer fee or the flipping fee. So I would love to hear a little bit more about what, as you're having your conversations about what other municipalities are doing across the country, what sort of the hiccups for you? What are these unintended consequences that are coming up? Could you share that a little bit more, and I think be just a little bit more candid on what about these ideas might be troubling from where you sit.
Sure. So I'm going to ask the Commissioner to just talk about some of the levers in terms of how it affects our property taxes here in the City of Boston, because I think that's what we are most directly charged with, and I think there are some interesting possible repercussions on property taxes in terms of the distribution of our levy across residential and commercial, which would ultimately affect homeowners and renters, and sort of what that looks like.
So my concern and the assessing department's concern is that this proposal has the potential to reduce the value of commercial property, and that would shift the tax levy onto residential taxpayers. The residential taxpayers would then pay more of the burden due to the decreased value of commercial properties. So much of what we do is about sales, and if these proposals are brought in at this level, I think that this would affect sales. I think that it would be in someone's interest to get around these fees. And that will affect what we have as sales, that will affect our commercial levy, that will push the taxes onto residential taxpayers because of the levy shift. I think the other thing that I am concerned about is what we've consistently seen is a decrease in transactions, specifically residential transactions. And so I asked our research department to do a comparison of saying, what were some of the transaction counts we had in 2005, 2006, and 2007, so we can get an idea of where that is compared to where we are now. So 2005, we had 11,797 transactions in the city. We just completed calendar year 18. We're at 7,814 transactions. It is the decrease in inventory that is one of the main drivers, especially on the residential side, that is causing values to increase, in that there is less inventory, so people are paying more for what is available. I am concerned that this 25% fee would further reduce the amount of inventory. If a contractor buys a property, it would be in their interest to sit on it for 24 months, and then 24 months and 1 day, they decide to sell it to avoid the fee, but that further constricts our inventory.
That's helpful. Chief Dillon, do you want to add anything?
No, nothing to add, thanks.
I think as we continue the conversation, it's good to know these things as we're grappling with the idea, to turn it into something that can actually happen to address the housing concerns. And one thing I'll add before I turn it over to my other colleagues, just out of respect for the other panels to come, you know, we're tackling also the issue of vacant lots, city-owned vacant lots in partnership with Council O'Malley, and some of the reasons as to why we're not developing those city-owned vacant lots is, you know, lack of resources. That's one piece of it, and we've heard that in the past. So the question is, how, again, do we generate more money to be able to develop these parcels as well? Most of them are largely in Dorchester, Mattapan, and Roxbury, my district, as well as Councilor Janey's district. So look forward to continuing the conversation about how we get to a place where this idea could turn into something that's extremely valuable for the city of Boston, and moving on these goals that we set, as well as activating these vacant lots that could be turned into housing and affordable housing for our most vulnerable. Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Flaherty.
Chair recognizes Councilor Zakin.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the sponsors for bringing this forward, and obviously everyone for being here. I think it's clear we have to do something when it comes to gentrification, displacement. You know, Sheila, you and I talk regularly about issues in the district, from preserving existing affordable housing to creating more. So I certainly welcome this conversation. I want to make sure we get it right. One question I have, and I know we're on a time limit, so I will try and just zip through this. I've been doing a little research here on my wonderful wireless device about New York City's the mansion tax, which was alluded to before. It's 1% on transfers over $1 million. That's certainly a lower threshold and a lower percentage than is proposed here. Doesn't seem to have slowed development in New York or growth in New York. You know, what the right number and percentage is, I think, is very much open for debate. But have you, I mean, what are your feelings on that, maybe from either from a financial perspective or from the housing development perspective? That would still be significant money, you know, for the city. If we're talking about that in the city of Boston, it's sort of, to my mind, belies some of the hand-wringing, saying this is going to stifle the market altogether, et cetera, when it's happening in New York at a much lower threshold. So I don't know if that's something you've...
I think the threshold is certainly key to what the proposal looks like in terms of, you know, as we said, issues around sort of market distortions about sort of where you could price something to avoid a fee, or you know, issues of tax avoidance, trying to sort of execute a sale in a way that would not be a recording at the Registry of Deeds, but would instead be some other vehicle that would allow you to sidestep it. I think that the sort of scale at which the transfer fee is set certainly matters in terms of what that complicated dance looks like, and I think ultimately how much revenue you would collect. So it may be that a lower percentage, sort of in terms of actual receipts, might get you close to a higher percentage, just in terms of what the eventual market behavior is.
Yeah. And I think from a development perspective, you know, obviously things have to make sense, whether it's a nonprofit developer for affordable housing, whether it's a for-profit developer, whomever. But, you know, when I sit here and I hear that New York City, on any transfer over $1 million, even if it's just 1%, you know, we're talking about 6% now, and I'm not making this a specific proposal, but we had a 1% transfer on properties over $2 million. I don't know. I know there were some figures circulate. I don't know if that, but I mean, we're looking at a 2%. You know, we'd be looking at 90 to 100 and some $140 million a year. I think that's worth discussing. I certainly am respectful of other opinions on this, and I do want to make sure, our good colleague President Campbell's concerns about folks' long-term residents in their neighborhoods. Certainly that's an issue in Mission Hill, where I represent, where families that have been there for decades and did the traditional, they bought a triple-decker, they lived in one unit, rented the others. Families live in that now because of rising prices. What was, a very affordable home 45 years ago could easily fetch $2 million. $2.5 million. So I want to be mindful of that, but I would just finish, and I don't want to belabor the point because I know we're short on time, but I would like to explore options for putting this on large commercial properties as an alternative, but also we just want to be clear, if New York City is doing this and they have they're putting up 200-story towers every other day, I think there's some room to work on this, and I really do want to thank our good colleagues for bringing this forward. It's an important discussion to have, whatever the specific results we have. So thank you.
There's less than 4, Josh. You were good. Councilor Flynn, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I represent the Seaport District, and I was down there actually an hour ago, but I see a lot of flipping taking place down there over the last several years. I'm troubled by that. Do we have an idea of how much money, how much linkage that was generated from the Seaport area?
I didn't bring that, but we do know how much linkage and inclusionary development money was generated from the Seaport. I can get that to you, Councillor.
All right. How much would it cost to stabilize historic Chinatown? How much would it help to have this transfer fee? And what impact would it have on the Chinatown community? We were devastated by the Airbnb program. We pushed out a lot of longtime residents. We pushed out elderly. We pushed out immigrants. Chinatown was their life, was their community. They relied on they got their health care from the health center. Social services were there. A lot of great nonprofits were there. And then the very wealthy businesses came in and pushed my residents right out of that community, several hundred units. So I'm very disappointed and disgusted about what happened. But I don't want to see that happen again. How can we make sure that the elderly don't get pushed out of Chinatown by these big wealthy corporations?
Agree. I couldn't agree with you more, Councillor, and that's, what working with you, that's why, we really felt that we needed to regulate the Airbnb industry and have done so. It's either 36 or 38% right now of the units, the residential units in Chinatown are deed restricted affordable and serving Chinatown well. I personally would like to increase that percentage. The more we build in Chinatown, the more we build affordable housing in Chinatown, the better we will be in better position to save Chinatown, because we need the residents to be able to stay. And that is a combination of building on land that's there and also acquiring buildings. We have a pipeline of projects in Chinatown that we need to advance. I think right now I keep this little separate list, 7 projects right now I think on that list that we do need to advance. So I am in total agreement that I think we need to build more affordable housing in Chinatown, increase the percentage overall if we're going to able to save Chinatown and its residents.
I think if the BPDA or any other city department wants to build in the downtown area, they should almost be required to do a walking tour of Chinatown and see the residents and talk to the residents, the immigrant community there, the low-income workers, and be part of the fabric of that community. If you build those luxury condos within a half block of Chinatown, come into the neighborhood, know the residents, and work with the city to make sure that there's no displacement at all, especially immigrants and low-wage workers. That's critical. We're the most progressive city in the country, and we should not be pushing out immigrants out of this city and low-wage workers. Then my final question is: would this type of bill reduce commercial property taxes? Do we have an idea what impact that would have?
So the commissioner said earlier that one of the things that we are worried about is the extent to which large commercial transactions, which are usually complicated transactions with lots of parties and components to them, that they would be altered in a way that might help them sort of be beneficially avoid some of this. And so it's possible that there might be mechanisms by which they do that. And I think the concern then is because our levy is basically doubled onto commercial properties, so that we can offer some savings to homeowners in terms of property taxes, that would ultimately shift back to residential properties. Okay. Did I do that right, Gail? Okay.
Yes, yes. I would be concerned that it would be an incentive for commercial property owners to change the way that they are structuring these transactions in order to avoid these fees, and that would push down commercial values, or it may just chill the market. People don't have to invest their money here, they can go other places. And that would chill the market on the commercial side, which would shift the levy onto the residential side. And so I'm very concerned about negative impacts on residents.
No, thank you. And I know my time's up, Mr. Chairman. I just want to reference a letter I received from the Boston Chinatown Residents Association. Mr. Yu, who's a dear friend of mine, an elderly gentleman who represents the community very well. I just want to highlight one line that he wrote me. These practices create wealth for a few wealthy investors while making life more expensive for Boston residents who are already struggling. And this is probably from the one of the most respected people in Chinatown. And you know, when we approve projects, let's also factor in the impact it has on the surrounding neighborhoods and the surrounding communities, especially low-income residents, working-class families, and the immigrants. So that's where my focus will be as we go forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say thank you to Councilor Janey and Councilor Edwards for both of their leadership on this important issue.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. Chair recognizes Councilor Marxiomo.
I'll waive my times.
Chair recognizes City Council Matt O'Malley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'd also like to echo thanks for Councilors Edwards and Janey for their leadership on this issue. I think many of us agree that, and certainly welcome to gentlemen and ladies, some of the gentleladies of the panel. We all agree we need to be doing more. We need to be increasing the revenue stream for affordability, for sustainability, not only as it relates to climate, but certainly as it relates to making sure that folks who are being displaced have opportunities. I just have a couple of questions. One, through you, Mr. Chairman, to the makers. In Section 2, it reads, the transfer fee, except where otherwise exempted pursuant to this Act, the City of Boston may impose a fee of up to 6%. And I think that's purposeful language that shows that there's an opportunity as we go into working sessions and ever to perhaps address that number. Yet, in the sentence that follows, it has any real property situated in the City of Boston as follows, A fee in the amount of 3% of said purchase price shall be due and payable by the seller, and B, a fee in the amount of 3% of said purchase price shall be due and payable by the purchaser. That's to make sure it's done evenly. I would just add that perhaps you add the language of up to 3% before both, where they're broken down as the fact that the 6% target is movable when it's first brought up, just more of a housekeeping issue. Secondly, I had a question. I think, Emma, you had alluded to this, perhaps Sheila did. Someone had asked about the flipping. There was a Boston Herald article on February 20th, the second to last line. It's paraphrasing the mayor saying, or I'm paraphrasing the mayor saying he's not sure if developers coming into the city to flip property is a big enough problem to warrant a transfer tax. According to city records, there were 3,700 transactions in the last fiscal year that would have been susceptible to the 25% transfer fee were implemented. Of those sales, 1,500 were sold at a lower price, while 1,650 were sold for the same amount of money they were purchased for, leaving only 550 potential targets of flipping. I certainly take whoever provided that information at their word. I was shocked. I was gobsmacked by that. were you all surprised to hear that so few properties were sold in the last 2 years for a larger percentage than they were originally put for?
I think that's consistent with what Bloomberg found in Vancouver and Toronto, which have similar residential markets to ours, which was 3 to 4% of the inventory was flipping, and so I wasn't, no.
Wow. Okay. And I guess I think it's clear, just to sort of differentiate, we've got flipping on sort of the higher end luxury downtown housing, and then you've got sort of the more residential in the neighborhoods where you've seen a longstanding building there's been investment money put in and then sold. Typically, we're talking also about a locally owned developer, or some multinational. So I think that is a distinction that should be made. That is all I have for this moment right now. Thank you.
Thank you,
Mr. Chairman.
Councilor O'Malley. So that will
Can I just add to that?
Sure.
I'm sorry.
Sure.
I realized there was a key piece that I should have highlighted, which is that when assessing looked at this in FY18, that the top two wards affected were, that would have been affected by the 25% were wards 18 and 20, and almost 60% of those transactions that would sort of be targeted by the 25% were single-family homes, which are not typically the types of transactions that we think of when we think about flipping. And so I think that, again, raised more questions for us about how do you target that in a way that gets at the transactions that I think are intended to be directed at. And I think, so as we've looked at the data, I think it raises more questions.
Yeah.
And the other piece that I think is important in terms of the timing of when we have data and how we sort of, the picture that the city of Boston sees is that we have this very helpful insight into what's happening in our neighborhoods in terms of a residential exemption. And I think that legislation points to that in a couple of key places in terms of something that is helpful to ascertain whether the folks who are buying or selling something have a real stake in that in terms of whether they'll live there. The problem on the timing of that is that that's a backward-looking snapshot, again, it takes a while to get a residential exemption. So at the time of sale, either you might have an existing residential exemption from somebody who lived there prior, or that if it was not a place that had a residential exemption, that it would take a year and a half.
Sometimes two, as I'm living this right now, yes.
Right, exactly. So again, it's sort of an imprecise tool to get at, I think, the underlying question, which is sort of, does somebody live here and have a connection to it in that way?
Okay. And that's helpful context, Emma, because for those here, and many know, wards 18 and 20 are primarily the neighborhoods of Hyde Park, a little bit of Mattapan, West Roxbury, a little bit of Rosendale, and you don't have large-scale development in the same thing. It's many cases properties that would be sold to somebody, a member of a family, for example. So that actually helps me understand those statistics a little bit better, because it was pretty shocking when I read that. So thank you all.
Thank you, Councilor O'Malley, and so thank you to this first panel, Chief, Commissioner, Director-in-Chief. You're welcome to stick around, and would encourage you to do so because we have 2 additional panels as well as some public testimony. So I'm going to call the next panel down, Greg Vassell, Melvin Vieira, Mark Stewart, and Travis DiMardo. While they're coming down to set up, I'm going to take some public testimony. Fatima Ali Salam, Suzanne Lee, Erin Chow, Karen Chen, and Erica Rothschild, and Michael Kane, in that order, with a public testimony stakes point. And just ask that you try to be as brief and succinct as possible, just given that we have another panel, as well as additional public testimony. So Fatima Ali Salam, Suzanne Lee, Erin Chow, Karen Chen, Erica Rothschild, and Michael Kane have indicated that they wish to testify. Now is your chance to do so. Welcome. You have the floor, ma'am. If you could state your name and affiliation, and you have the record. You have the floor.
Hi. My name is Fatima Ali Salam. I'm the chair of the Greater Mattapan Neighborhood Council. For all of the reasons detailed in this ordinance, I am speaking today to voice the council's support of it. The council was voted into existence by its residents to address the very issues detailed in this ordinance: resident displacement and the increasing lack of affordability of both rental and owner housing in the Greater Mattapan area. This has been exacerbated by developers who see our neighborhood as an opportunity to maximize their profits with little consideration to the imbalance they are creating in our neighborhood. Not only are the "We Buy Ugly Houses" signage seen pervasively, now we see their vans parked in our neighbors' driveways. We are not against development. We are against displacement and poor design. The term right-of-way has come to mean the right to displace or disregard residents. In spite of the recent launch of the planned Mattapan study that seeks to ensure that we preserve wisely, enhance equitably, and grow inclusively, the reality is that residents are seeing developers scoop up both vacant spaces and existing homes to replace them with housing options that are out of the reach of most of our current residents. In 2017, our neighborhood's median household income was a little over $48,000. This is significantly lower than the Boston median of $62,000. And this is the BPDA's source of income. The average two-bedroom rental currently in Mattapan is almost $2,000 per month. We have seen an increase of long-term renters displaced. We have council members currently who are fighting against rental property owners who have raised rents upwards of $700 per month. In the 1990s, it was expected that a person who wanted to purchase a home should expect to pay 28% of their income towards housing costs. Currently in Mattapan, renters or homeowners are expected to pay upwards of 50% of their incomes to housing. It leaves little room for other necessities, heat, hot water, electricity, food, or entertainment. Geographically, Greater Mattapan is surrounded by Rosendale, Roxbury, Jamaica Plain, Hyde Park, and Dorchester. If care is not taken to protect housing, environment, and employment opportunities for local residents, then the diversity that makes this neighborhood a vibrant one will cease to exist. Not only will affordable housing disappear, but the natural support systems that we as human beings depend upon, ability to care for our family members and friends through nearby proximity, access to public transit to obtain education, employment, and entertainment, or shopping opportunities will cease to be available for a majority of current residents. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Karen Chen. I don't know why it's doing that. Okay, should I try again?
Maybe keep your phone,
Yeah.
Put the phone over here. Maybe try now.
Hello.
There we go.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Karen Chen. I am testifying on behalf of the Chinese Progressive Association, the original CPA. We're based in Chinatown. And in the last, 15 years, there's been a lot of displacement in Chinatown. And one of the trends that we see is that a lot of the displacement followed by ownership turnover. And oftentimes, in the ownership turnover, is at an inflated price. And, there's, just a few examples. 106 Tyler Street was sold twice as market value at over $3 million, and they turned the entire building, the investor turned the entire building into short-term rental. And most recently, the owner threatened a small business commercial tenant with court action to double his rent. So this is a common trend in Chinatown, in the last 5 years. I think that, the city and the community have this shared view that there is a housing crisis in Boston, and there's a huge need for affordable housing. I think oftentimes the debate is that how deeply affordable are these housing, and that whether or not they're able to help preserve existing residents. And we believe that this policy in having luxury transfer fee or commercial and real estate transfer fee will help alleviate the housing crisis. And it's very much needed revenue for the city. And right now the state has several policies out there on luxury transfer fees. So I urge the city council and the city to provide full support so that we can push the state to step up more and play a bigger role in addressing the housing crisis. Thank you. And I think Suzanne Lee was called, but she was going to read the letter that Councilor Flynn referenced to for the Chinatown Residents Association.
Hi, good afternoon, City Councilors. I'm actually here to read something that a Miss Paying Yu wrote. She's traveling today, so she could not make it, but when she found out this hearing was happening, she actually came to our office and sat down, and I was taking down all these notes. So I'm really excited to be able to read this on her behalf. So, dear Boston City Council, my name is Peng Yu, and I'm a current resident of the South End. I formerly lived in Chinatown at 103 Hudson Street, but in January of 2015, a new landlord bought the building and evicted all the tenants. Unfortunately, building turnover often leads to tenant eviction and displacement in Chinatown. In addition, building turnover results in and fuels land speculation in the Chinatown community. Without regulation, people will continue to buy and sell buildings for a profit at the expense of residents and community members. High building turnover and land speculation threatens the future of the immigrant working class in Chinatown as rents increase. The hope of remaining in the community is becoming more and more slim. Chinatown is a community for working class Chinese immigrants. Nevertheless, the integrity of the Chinatown community is eroding as long-term residents and new immigrants are being forced out of the community. If nothing is done to address building turnover, the fabric of the Chinatown working class community will slowly fade. Our community needs more affordable housing to address the housing crisis brought on by gentrification, land speculation, and building turnover. I was fortunate enough to find subsidized housing, but not all the tenants evicted with me in 2015 have been as lucky. A luxury transfer fee policy will help create more funds for affordable housing and discourage property owner buying and selling at inflated prices. I no longer want people to continue to profit off our community. We need housing for people, not for profit. Sincerely, Ms. Peng Yu.
Erica Rothschild?
Committee Chair, Boston City Councilors, and everyone in attendance. Hi, my name is Erica Rothschild. I'm a senior community organizer at the Jamaica Plain Neighborhood Development Corporation. We've been deeply rooted in the JP community for more than 40 years, building affordable housing, helping small local businesses, and providing financial coaching to low-income families. We believe that the issues our community face require bold and creative approaches, and that we must be willing to take risks in order to find real solutions. This is why we support docket number 0187, sponsored by Councilors Edwards and Janey. To share our personal experience with the booming developing scene in Boston, you can look at our housing portfolio. Over the past 4 decades, from 1977 to 2017, we built north of 660 units of housing. Our pipeline from 2018 to 2021 is 499 units. In 3 years, we will build and preserve more housing than we had in 3 decades. Our increasing growth in development corresponds to the increasing need for housing. When we completed our last building in 2017, we received over 3,000 applications for 39 units. Given the state of the housing crisis, we need additional revenue streams to meet the rising need. This act helps create that additional revenue stream. This proposal addresses 3 of the underlying issues that impact the current landscape of rising housing costs and displacement. The sale applies to sales over $2 million, so it's paid by developers who have the funds to invest in large-scale luxury development. The culture around flipping properties needs to be addressed as it displaces longtime residents, and the additional 25% fee for property flipping is a disincentive for speculative developers. And the hundreds of millions of dollars that's collected from this initiative will go to stabilizing communities and addressing affordable housing. The combination of a transfer fee and flipping tax could have significant impact in preventing displacement of residents and local businesses. For several years, residents and community organizations in Jamaica Plain have been struggling with investors who buy up increasing swaths of the neighborhood. In the case of occupied buildings, this often means charging rents that are unaffordable to much of the existing JP Rocks community. Several longstanding businesses have been displaced, and others will soon lose their leases. It is particularly egregious when such property owners then turn and sell the property for twice or more the amount that they paid for it. If enacting this law won't eliminate this kind of practice, it will at least ensure that the developers will pay a price, and that price goes straight into the Affordable Housing Development Fund. As the real estate market continues to skyrocket, we urge the council to consider the passage of docket number 0187. We need this bill to help protect the residents and the character of the neighborhoods we love. We applaud Councilor Edwards and Councilor Janey for leading this effort. Thank you very much for your time.
I'm going to go to the panel. Go ahead, Michael.
Thank you, Councilor, and thank you for filing this important measure. My name is Michael Kane. I'm a resident of JP, and I'm here representing the Mass Alliance of HUD tenants. And we've been fighting to save at-risk affordable housing, and tenants need additional subsidies to make that real, which is one reason we're supporting this proposal. We had proposed a real estate speculation tax to Mayor Walsh during the transition, so we're very glad to see this is actually before us. I just wanted to briefly highlight a couple of examples of why it's needed in commercial development. There's a Swedish company named Skanska that built a $160 million office building in 2014 in the Seaport District. It flipped it 2 years later for $450 million to another foreign company. Why aren't we taxing that speculative gain? It's a purely speculative gain. The same company built another building last year for $170 million and just sold it like the same day that it opened for another 170 above that. I mean, what is this? So we think that the tax could actually be a lot greater on speculative gains. And we'd like to bring, I have copies here of the schedule from the Vermont real estate transfer tax, speculation tax on rural land, which has been in existence for 40 years. And it did work to slow down speculation in rural land in Vermont. And they use a graduated table, which looks like this, and I'll pass it out to the council, which increases the speculation tax based on the extent of gain above the basis, the original basis. So it's a tax on the speculation, not just on the sale, and also a higher rate if it's for a shorter period of time. And if you have a graduated scale like that, that would address the issue that the assessing department raised about causing artificial manipulation of a single date or a single amount. So we would encourage you to look at that. And perhaps a much higher scale could be, you could have another category for very large, take a 10 million or more. If you had a tax like this, for just those two buildings, the city would have brought in about $200 million in revenue to the city, and the people that sold it would have still made a huge profit, unearned profit, on their original investment. So I wanted to share that. I also wanted to thank the councilors that have supported. We're going to work to get this passed to the State House, all of us in the room. But we want to thank the council for also looking at the existing property tax revenue that is coming in that we think could be targeted in the short run. Even the real estate industry may support that and use that for low-income renters. And we appreciate that the Neighborhood Housing Trust is looking at that as a policy this week. So thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Good to see you. Welcome to our panelists. Greg, why don't you start it off, if you don't mind, as CEO and President of the Greater Boston Real Estate Board. Welcome, and good to see you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome to Councilors Edwards, Councilor Janey. Thank you so much for being here, and other members of the council. On behalf of the 12,000 members of the Greater Boston Real Estate Board and our 5 divisions, we are comprised of both commercial and residential divisions. We were founded in 1889 at a time when the city of Boston was growing and changing much like it is today. In fact, we were founded at a time when the Back Bay had been filled in because Boston was a peninsula and we needed more land to meet a growing and changing and diversifying city. The Real Estate Board believes that the people of Boston need more housing at prices that they can afford. Creating affordable housing is the mission of many of our members. We believe that the Walsh administration has done the right thing and pursued the right policies to solve the problem. In fact, if you take a step back and think about it, in some ways, their progress has been pretty remarkable. The predicament we find ourselves in is that we're in a very red-hot market, and never before has Boston been in demand as much as it is today. Our members are comprised of some of the largest producers, managers, and owners of affordable housing in the country. This is their business. The money that this tax would generate is something that could help them in their businesses. But to a member, they oppose it. Boston's success is based on the fact that our workforce is well educated. It is a great city to live and work in. As an industry, we recognize that, and that really concerns us. As I mentioned, we need more housing at different price points, and we're deeply concerned about displacement and gentrification and the issues that come with it. Because Boston needs to be for all of us, whether you're rich or you're less affluent. Boston needs to be available to everybody. But the solution is not one that we can come to overnight. The game plan has been remarkable so far, but it takes time. And it's a factor of a balance between economics and production. And a 6% tax on all transactions really upsets this balance. And make no mistake, this isn't a tax. It isn't a fee. There will be people that say that this tax will not affect them because their properties are less than $2 million. But taxes like this trickle down in the economy, and they end up coming to rest with those that can least afford them. Companies will pay more in terms of rent. People will pay more in terms of rent. And what I mentioned earlier was the solution to this crisis needs to be a balance between both job creation and housing. Because Boston is in demand because it's a place where people want to work and where companies want to set up their operations and provide jobs, and people want to work. The interesting thing about this tax is it's predicated on an increasing market. But take for a second and think about what it would look like in a falling market. And we all know that real estate goes up and it goes down. We've seen the increase in the last 10 years, but at some point we know there will be a correction. Say, for example, that we have a company, and that company unfortunately can't make it go anymore because the market is declining, and an institution and a bank has to foreclose. This tax would capture that institution on the foreclosure, and then it would capture it potentially again on the flip side as it tried to move that property within 24 months to get it into another use. Now, there are some people may not see any value and any problem with that, but if you take a step back and look at banks and lending institutions, they may be unwilling to do business in that kind of an environment. In fact, Professor Barry Bluestone even referenced this on January 16th when he did an interview on WGBH radio and thought that in a declining market, something like this could lead to less production. The real estate industry in Boston already contributes significantly to the creation of affordable housing in 3 ways, which we've already covered earlier: through linkage, inclusionary zoning, and now, as of 2016, the CPA. Linkage is paid by commercial development and has been an effective tool for the administration to generate money for the Neighborhood Housing Trust and the Neighborhood Job Trust. Since 2014, $31.4 million in housing linkage has leveraged a total of $562 million in public funds in 39 developments, which cost $837 million. The projects created almost 1,300 affordable units, and they preserved 544 units. Source of that data was from the BPDA. IDP is another tool. By the creation of affordable units on site, by contributions to the IDP fund and through the creation of off-site units in nearby projects. Under the IDP program, developers directly created 2,000 units of affordable housing, and also over $100 million in the IDP fund helped to support the creation of an additional 12,000 units. That source, again, was the BPDA. The Community Preservation Act was passed in 2016, and it's something that the industry did not oppose. That's something that we all paid for, and I believe as in fall of 2018, over $34 million of projects under the CPA was slated for approval. The industry pays through these three avenues already for affordable housing. Our members build it, our members support it, and our members believe that this tax, which some say could benefit business, would be an impediment. This tax puts us on the wrong path, and it will find itself burdening those that can least afford it. I'm very lucky to be joined today by a panel of our membership who would like to share their views on the matter as well.
How are you doing today?
How you doing?
Chairman Flaherty and Councilor Edwards and Councilor Janey and the rest of the members. My name is Melvin A. Vieira, Jr. I work for Remax Destiny. I've been a real estate agent for over 30 years. I've been selling real estate in the city of Boston for 25. I started selling real estate in California. And, you know, when I moved back, I remember the prices being around $25,000 to $100,000. At the time, prices have gone up dramatically. And as we have gone through a couple of recessions since then, you know, it hasn't put a damper on the increase of prices. And there hasn't been a decrease in housing demand either. Yes, we are in one of the hottest markets. I say this because the inner city, who you think are not going to be affected now by this proposal, may be in the future because prices go up. We shouldn't penalize the people who are taking the risk of purchasing and fixing up neglected property, which can help make the neighborhoods better overall. I remember walking through drug-infested dens in South End, Dorchester, Mattapan, Roxbury, back in the day when the recession. I remember walking there through with police officers. And now when I can walk in those same neighborhoods are actually beautiful. And they're still coming along. But the biggest issue is that we're trying to help the right people. We're also impacting some of those people as well because of the tax is a bad idea. And what that will do is that'll affect the rents on the working family and the cost to purchase a home. This new tax is nothing but a double taxation. And it's unfair targeting to certain people who are trying to sell, but especially for those who are trying to buy homes. Because the cost of it would pass down to their tenants if there's rental property. I don't want the people who need this type of program to carry on the burden. Yes, some must pay taxes at the end of the day, but they shouldn't have to pay extra taxes. They don't have to spend their money. The wages are not going up and basically remain flat over time. And that will also gravely affect some people. The home builder, the flipper, who you're trying to get money out of, really are not going to be affected. And this plus, because they obviously know someone or have the inside scoop. And they will learn how to avoid or work the system. They'll make up the difference by passing the 6% down to the little man. I'm a very big advocate in home buying. I've been one of the first person to ever teach first-time homebuyer classes for MAHA. One of the first instructors. I was actually hired by Florence Henderson, who was the person who actually was the original person of the Soft Second program, which now the program's called the One program. I've also worked, matter of fact, and taught classes for the city of Boston. I've sat on their realtor panel and everything else that they've had done. I've also gone to many of the meetings with the CHAPA, the Citizens Housing and Planning Action Association, trying to figure out how I can help out and create. I've also sat on the board at Kaufman Square in DC. I'm really invested in my community, trying to make sure, but I do not want to see them get passed down and get this tax passed to them. There have been many programs that have been put in place to help create affordable housing in Boston. And I ask you, why haven't they worked? I ask you all to sit down with us to try to come up with a better program or solution, okay, so that we can discuss options to make this work. We need programs for our communities to teach generational wealth, teach them about life insurance, retirement plans, and everything else. We need to teach our children a trade to get them into the colleges so that they can earn a degree, get into high school, or get a GED diploma. We must teach our children, adults, how to survive in this world. A quote from the Bible states, "If you give a man to fish, he'll eat today. But teach a man to fish, and he'll eat forever." Thank you very much, Chairman Flaherty, Councilor Janey, Councilor Lydia Edwards, and the rest of the council.
Thank you, Melvin. Appreciate it. Mark, welcome. You have the floor.
Hello. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss this important issue. My name is Mark Stewart. I'm a commercial real estate broker and advisor in Boston. I wanted to talk about this from the commercial side of the equation. I think only 44% or so of residential sales would be impacted by this. On the flip side of that, you said 44%?
4%, right?
Right.
Okay.
And
that's with the exemption.
Yes, would be subject to this tax. And on the flip side, for the commercial side, nearly all sales would be impacted by this. That goes way beyond what we would think of when people have been discussing sort of our sparkling towers on the city skyline, and to reach out into the neighborhoods, to small businesses, to the creators of most of the new jobs and the backbone, really, of the neighborhoods. That's the large fraction of commercial sales in the city. The inevitable result of a tax focused only on transactions will be to chill the market, as the assessor's representative noted earlier, depriving people of business opportunities and jobs. I'd like to point back, as I think we talked about, what happens in the market changes. We can all remember 2008 and the rippling effects that occurred when the market is in decline. These impacts can be widespread. Would a tax like this apply when a sale produces no profit? I'm talking on the commercial side, but what happens in these situations? I'd also say that this may surprise many, but those sparkling skyline office towers in Boston are often owned by pension funds and other retirement entities and vehicles. For instance, the building where my office is located, Exchange Place, recently sold. It was purchased by a for-profit developer. It turns out owns only a very small slice of the equity, 2%. The other 49% is owned for two pension funds that own the building. So together, that's 98% of that building is retirement funds. And it might also interest you to know that one of those is the Commonwealth's pension fund, PRIM, for government employees and teachers. This kind of tax simply on sales, where it's not allocated as across all buyers, ends up being focused on that point of transaction, which is creates a lot of issues, and as I said, it's a chill in the market. I feel we can all agree that we support and want to see furthered affordable housing initiatives in Boston. That said, some have argued that we cannot build ourselves out of our housing affordability gap, but I disagree. Here's a personal example. I live within walking distance of Reedville. Reedville has excellent locations for workforce housing that are not currently occupied by people. They're business locations, would not displace any residents, and yet those developments are currently stymied. It's a difficult balance as communities change, and also just growth in general is a difficult idea for people. It means change. But we're also talking about this situation here that is about change. We're saying we need to change. So I guess I would conclude by saying it isn't the funding sources that are lacking as much as it is the systemic issues of of zoning, regulatory hurdles, and other kinds of impediments which lead people to conclude that we can't build ourselves what we need to house our community, from the wealthy to the homeless. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Travis, welcome.
Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for having me today to speak on this very important issue. My name is Travis D'Amato. I'm this year's president of the Real Estate Finance Association and a member of the Greater Boston Real Estate Board. This is my first time testifying in a public hearing, so I apologize if I'm a little rushed or a little nervous. I may have a few missteps. My Real Estate Finance Association board is a diverse set of professionals across a wide variety of professions within the real estate industry. This includes lenders, bankers, brokers, developers, and owners across all sectors: multifamily, office, retail, industrial, and hotels. This gives me a unique perspective across the Greater Boston commercial real estate industry, citywide. My personal specialty is multifamily housing. I've spent significant time on the issue of workforce housing and even worked to produce a white paper explaining the problem as a past co-chair of the Urban Lands Institute Housing and Economic Development Council. I'm also keenly aware of the homelessness issue here in the city of Boston, and I'm committed to help end it through Heading Home, which I was recently appointed to the board. Boston does not have enough housing, period, in any category, from homeless to the wealthy, as Mark mentioned. I've spent time studying the mayor's housing plan, and I'm certain that everyone in this room, and judging by the testimony so far today, agrees with my assessment. This transfer tax, however, would lower real estate values, put a burden on the financeability of new housing developments, and discourage investment in the city of Boston, and in my opinion, really go against the city's housing goals. And this includes housing across all income spectrums. These taxes would cause housing developers to require higher rents to justify new housing development costs and make it more difficult to produce new housing. As those rents go higher, especially in the lower and middle income space, more subsidies would be required by the city in order to make these projects viable. In addition, I believe it would reduce transaction volume and commercial real estate tax base by that lowering in value. Boston's workforce housing is being built, however, but not in Boston. It's being built in Revere and Everett and Chelsea, and towns accessed by transit where people can go and afford the housing that they so desperately need. I'm very concerned that this tax will continue to push economic development outside of the city of Boston to neighboring communities, in a place where I really believe that keeping these people in the city of Boston and providing housing for them gives us the diverse set of ideas and the diverse set of personalities that we really want, and I know the people on this council so desperately need. Real estate requires all kinds of financing, and we, the Real Estate Finance Association, knows that that includes both public and private investment, and we truly are at the center of all of those transactions. In order to get financing, whether it be debt, equity, or public subsidy, the deals must make economic sense from an underwriting standpoint. My membership is an expert when it comes to these numbers, and I would like to provide that expertise to the council as we start to look at the economic viability of housing projects and commercial projects and the effect that this tax would have on that underwriting. The reality is that the deals that are currently on the borderline of financeability, the ones that we really want to see built, are in neighborhoods that desperately need economic development. This tax will likely affect those developments more than the luxury housing space or commercial office space. I know that Boston's 2030 master plan identifies an urgent need for all types of housing, and is specifically housing for the middle. I believe this tax would significantly impact the financeability of those housing starts and would be counter to our goals of providing price-appropriate housing for all. Thank you for your time.
Very good. Thank you very much, Travis. We've also been joined by our colleague, City Councilor Michelle Wu, and I'll throw it over to my colleagues for questions. Councilor Edwards.
Thank you so much, and I do think it's important that the table does involve all voices. No one likes taxes, so I'm not surprised that you're in opposition to this. I'll continue to call it fee. And it's no surprise that in many cases there's just a different understanding of how real estate is working for people in the city of Boston. Just to be very clear, so maybe you have not seen this or understand, the affordable units in Boston are not actually affordable to most Bostonians. Okay, so while many people, especially in the real estate industry, are patting themselves on the back for the volume of affordable units that they are producing, in many cases, most Bostonians, especially many in my community of East Boston, cannot afford them, cannot afford even what is considered affordable. So there is a disconnect based on the measuring of affordability that you did not create, okay? But we are all operating, the city, DND, BPDA, we are all continuing to operate under this word affordable set by the FMR and understanding of what is actually affordable that is not. And that's based on the AMI, which includes Newton, it includes Brookline, it includes many, many incomes that do not reflect the average income in Boston. So I will say outright that even when you're patting yourselves on the back for producing affordable units, and I'm including the city as well, we are not actually meeting the income affordability of most Bostonians. So that is the frustration I am coming with, that and the fact that a majority of Bostonians rent. And as a result, if we're not actually meeting the income needs of majority of people who live here, we're planning for their displacement, whether we like to admit it or not. You can call it Boston 2030, you can call it whatever, but that's a plan then that is displacement-based. Those are my concerns. I also represent the Mercantile Building, which is a 13A. And I'm putting this out there so there's total transparency about where I'm coming in this perspective. And if we're going to set a table, that maybe you can then respond to those perspectives, understanding with your own expertise. I represent a building that's coming out of expiring use because a developer in California has decided that he's going to make as much money as possible off the building he bought in the North End. And there's nothing that we can do about that except watch the rents go up and accept the fact that people are going to be displaced. There's nothing you are going to do about it. There's nothing the city's going to do about it. God knows we are trying. This tax, this fee, would help provide the coffers to help offset that and provide those subsidies. So I appreciate the concern expressed, but the Greater Boston Real Estate Board, while being deeply concerned about displacement, you oppose this fee, you've opposed the right of first refusal, just cause eviction, right to counsel. And so for us, or for those of us who are in advocate circles looking for that partnership that you expressed and the table that you would want to set, when we have proposed ideas, it has consistently been opposed by your organization. And as you mentioned, you're experts in real estate. Well, the people behind you are experts in displacement and everyday people, working people, struggling to be in Boston. And you've opposed almost every single idea they've had for policies to try and prevent displacement. So I'm not trying to say that that makes you good, bad, or whatever, and I appreciate, the fact that you are in a business, you are lobbying, and you're doing what you need to do. But I'm just going to call you on that and being deeply concerned about affordable units. I rather, if you're just going to advocate for your base, that's fine. They're doing the same thing. But I'm not going to let that go away, or really, I'm going to challenge that, saying you're deeply concerned about affordable units when many of the units you're producing. I'm sorry, am I upsetting you?
No.
Okay. When many of the affordable units you're producing aren't actually...
Councilor, we do understand it is an election year.
Boom! Boom! All right. You understand it's an election year. Okay. I understand that your job is to represent people who don't actually live here and could vote for me anyway.
These people.
Okay?
They all come in, this is their job. They live in Quincy. They live in Revere. They don't live in Boston.
Those are my constituents here. I'm sorry, 71% of my constituents in East Boston rent. Sir, sit down.
The entire city. Why are you representing the entire city?
Majority of this entire city, 65% of them rent. Majority.
Okay, okay.
So I'm
I
happy
just
for
wanna-
you and your opinion, but the fact of the matter is,
Right.
Greg, I expected a little more from you, but if that's really the context and the tone we're going to take in this back and forth, I'm happy to continue it, or I'm happy to let you rise to the occasion.
Counselor, and we expected a little bit more from you.
All right.
The things that you've put forth, we would love to support, but they have no basis in economics, and we can't. But not once, and I've mentioned this to you many times, have we ever put everybody together in a room and try to work this stuff out. You have advocates, you have the owners, you have everybody around a table, and we sit down and say, okay, here's the issue. How do we solve that?
Well, so
we
let me
end
just
up in
address your
forums
comment.
like this.
Because he said this is an election year, so I guess I'm just being posturing to make sure I get reelected. So I'm responding to that. So let's just be clear. Election year or non-election year, you can ask those advocates, you can ask anybody else. I have been in the struggle and fighting and advocating for families, okay? So I want to be clear about my own reputation and what I feel is my character and the reasons why I'm here that's being attacked. I want to be very clear for that. I have never wavered from that and fought extremely hard for poor people and working people in this city for my career. That is a fact. I am not running away from that.
I agree. I have
But you brought up the
great respect
election
for
year.
you.
You brought up the election year. You brought up the election year.
And I'm sorry, but I also have great respect for you because you do a great job for your community.
Well, thank you, but I am perturbed by the fact that when you say that you're deeply concerned about displacement and the folks who have been fighting in it have produced ideas, every single one of them your organization has opposed. Every single one.
Can you help us with land values in the city? Can we find a way to make projects more affordable by dropping land values? Can you help us by making projects more affordable by lowering the cost of labor and materials? I'd love to be able to figure that out because we could produce stuff at a lot lower value, but we can't seem to figure that one out. Land is what it is. Materials and labor are what they are.
Go ahead.
No, if you can help us with that, we'd love to be able to, we could come up with a solution.
I think that one of the solutions is producing and getting some income off of the immense amount of money that's being made in real estate. That is, I think one of the solutions is this transfer fee to assure that it goes into the neighborhood housing trust and then we can provide additional money for subsidizing, if not purchasing outright, homes in our neighborhoods. That's my solution to this. That is what I'm bringing to the table. And I see your opposition is really just because it seems like there's a market-based understanding of how things go and you just don't like taxes. But there really is no real clear solution coming from you about displacement or about true affordability or keeping this community in Boston. And I guess that's what I'm looking for. You mentioned,
Vieira, Melvin.
Vieira mentioned setting the table and having people come to it. And I appreciate your work. And I really loved hearing about it, all the work you've done in Maha, working in communities and so on and so forth to make sure that ownership, and I completely agree with you, that is the way to stabilize a community is making sure people can own. Mm-hmm. I 100% agree with you. But what tools and toolkits are you going to help from your vantage point now in real estate? What are you proposing?
I'm proposing to make sure we all sit down together, go over things, and I know that there has been conversation here basically that we've opposed a lot of things. But what I would love to do is let's go ahead and try to wipe the slate clean, sit down together, and let's start from the drawing board again and let's see how we can get back to the basics. Because the thing is, we can sit here and fight back and forth, but if we are not willing to listen and to agree to disagree, we're never going to go anywhere.
Thank you. So when we were talking, you mentioned several things, and I think it's part of the conversations. This bill is extremely flexible. It allows for a lot of exemptions. For example, one of the exemptions, or one of the things we can consider is a downturn in the economy, such as a sunset clause. That is an option to have in this bill. You also can exempt all bankruptcies. Those are things you can do. This is a working product of which your feedback could be very vital to assure we produce the most balanced product. If you're willing to do that, if you just are going to be opposed to any kind of fee, then this whole back and forth seems to be, I really wonder how fruitful it will be. But if you're truly interested in striking a balance where incomes and some sort of revenue can be driven or derived from these transfers, I'm happy to have that. Am I upsetting you? I'm so sorry. Just keep thinking you're... no, okay. I'm curious then, if we were to have a sunset clause, if we were to exempt bankruptcy properties, if we were to exempt properties or waive the fee outright if there was a deed restriction put on to prevent the rents from going up. These are all wonderful tools and creative ways of looking at this. Where would you guys stand? There's tons of ways in which we can do this. If the fee were graduated, so it's for every, it doesn't start at 6%, it gets up to 6% depending on the sale price. Also the flipper's tax, it's up to 25%. If after a certain amount of time, it goes down, for example, after the first 6 months it's 25%, and then as you go on it goes down to 0. I would love to hear some actual numbers and solutions from you, but if outright you're just gonna oppose this, if you're never gonna support this, then don't bother with the exercise. But if you actually can think of a balanced way that supports your members' economic needs and also helps to drive and get us revenue for the city of Boston, I'm happy to set that table today. I'm happy to set that table tomorrow, and you are more than welcome in my office to do that.
I think that's the discrepancy in the viewpoints, is you're looking at it from how do we generate a lot of revenue. And what we're saying is there is a process that is not towards implementation of this development, that is stymied and not occurring at the speed and the breadth that it should in order to meet the need to provide this housing. So that's really what we're talking about, is how do we get those units in the ground and built and occupied, right? I think everybody can agree that that is what we're looking to do.
So, no, I think we have a different narrative, right? Because I opened up my comments noting that affordable, no matter how many units, if you're producing them at a measurement that is not actually meeting the real economic needs, you can produce 100 units, call them all affordable. If they actually aren't,
I don't disagree with you at all on that.
Right, so getting more units isn't enough for me, isn't the goal for me. It is making sure, it isn't. I mean, it's the goal for you, but it isn't. And you had said that we can all agree on that. No, I don't. What I'm trying to do is figure out how to get additional revenue, which you said is not necessarily a perspective that you are coming from.
Right.
So I guess we'll disagree. But my point is the numbers. If there's wiggle room, if there's a balance that can be struck based on your calculations, that would assure, or at least not hurt to as much as you're claiming it would, your economic and your bottom lines, and we can also generate some additional revenue, which is the goal of this, then I'd love to have that conversation. And I'll point to New York, I'll point to DC, I'll point to San Francisco, all of whom have transfer fees, all of whom, from what I can tell, are not short of development. So I'll continue to do my research. I'm hoping that you'll do yours and come back with some numbers. But again, if this is something you will adamantly oppose no matter what we do, then it's really hard to set that table. It's really hard to have that serious conversation. If at the end of the day, it's just not going to you're not going to do the work, you're not going to come to the table, then don't ask for the table.
We'll always come to the table.
Some numbers, though. Some numbers.
Well, and it's interesting because, you know, the city sort of alluded to this, that property taxes in different parts of the country are different than they are here. So it's hard to have apples to apples when you look at it. You know, New York has a different tax structure than we do. Their rent control structure, it was very different than the one that was in place here. So it's hard to be able to sort of make it all line up because we have to look at it based on how Boston functions and how these other places function. But, you know, I would assume you'd have working sessions on this and whatever the next steps are, and we'd certainly be part of that.
Councilor, I have a quick point I want to make. So I like data, right? And I've learned a lot today, even from the panel that was here before us, right? Yeah. And, you know, I'd be curious, Chairman Flynn, about the Seaport District and what the commercial tax base was before it was built out and what it is now, right? Because you do pay property taxes, right? And I'm not here to speak on coming up with a new idea or replacement for the transfer tax, but I did learn a lot of very interesting things, right? Because I would argue that a 6% tax on, call it commercial real estate, would discourage development or discourage transactions, right? That's what my testimony was. I agree with you that the inclusionary housing policy, producing units at 70 to 80% of AMI, doesn't solve Boston's housing affordability crisis. But it's also not the only housing being built. My membership consists of significant amounts of affordable housing developers at true low income, under 40% of AMI levels, that is being produced in the city of Boston, right? And my point is, I didn't come prepared with those facts until the numbers, but I know and I have membership that can provide them, right? So I agree with you, it doesn't make sense to build an inclusionary zone unit in the Seaport for $700,000 or $600,000 in a high-rise versus a lower-cost alternative that could provide the same rent, right? And I think even someone from the assessment department mentioned that if real estate values go down, and they would, this would cause a reduction in real estate values. The simple math is 6%, but in reality, when you look at the reversion, when they trade again at the end of a 10-year hold period, not a 2, that's another 6% hit, right? So somewhere between 6 and 12 would hurt in just the basic math on property values. And if you lower the values of the commercial tax base in the city of Boston by 10% or 8% conservatively, what does that hit on an annual basis? And I would just want to know what the numbers are, right? And if we're talking about generating annual revenue on a sustainable basis, a transfer tax would cut down transaction volume. People would sell less. People would hold longer. Skanska wouldn't sell their building. They'd hold it for 10 years and get the revenue that way, right? So, you discourage transactions and what your goal you're trying to achieve, which is more revenue, which I'm 100% with you on, right? And I'm willing to have the discussion on where that comes from and how, and provide the expertise of my entire membership to tell you ways that it could still work and ways that it could be, whether it's a tax or a fee or however you want to talk about it. But I don't think it's and Greg, you may hate me for saying this, I don't think it's the position of every single commercial real estate person in the city of Boston that, will never consider any sort of fee or tax ever, right? That's not what it is, right? So I think there's a lot of data that could be learned and a lot of different ways to, cross this. This is my first time here, so I apologize if I'm overstepping, but that's my quick thoughts on it. I'd love to see more of that data. I'd be curious about how many units are being built under 50% of AMI. Okay. Right, and how many inclusionary zoning units were built in the Seaport, for instance? It's 70 to 80% of AMI, right? Everyone keeps picking on the Seaport, obviously it's been a massive boom for investment in the city of Boston, both from intellectual capital and jobs.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Councilor Janey.
And Seaport was built with millions, or was it billions of dollars of public money, and it does not look like the rest of the city.
True.
So I just want to make that clear. I represent Roxbury, South End, Dorchester, and Fenway. People are doing in my community of Roxbury exactly what you've already said without this. They're sitting on properties waiting for a big payday. And what we have to, I want to come back to the quote that someone said, that we need housing for people, not for profit. You, sir, Mark, did you mention 4%? So this would only impact 4% of properties.
Last year of the sales.
I can't hear you. Can you speak into the mic, please?
Last 2017 of the sales that occurred, something like 238 of the around 6,000 residential
4%,
sales.
is that the figure?
That's
so,
about 4%.
So 4%. So what it sounds like to me is, once again, the top percent in this country, here and now in this city, are trying to protect their interests at the expense of all the people who are in this room. And that is not okay. That is not okay. I want to come, no, it's okay, listen. Sir, Melvin, you walk through drug-infested communities in the city of Boston, I think you said earlier?
Back in the 30s, it was 30 years ago.
Okay, so I lived in drug-infested communities.
I do too.
Lived in drug-infested communities. I know what happens when people want to speculate and not invest in our community. So we're not against investment. We want investment. What we don't want is speculation and flipping. So I live in these communities. We have other models, other solutions that have come forward that have dealt with how we develop a neighborhood that is community-driven, that is led by the people. DS&I lived on Dudley Street. Nothing but empty lots, gangs, drugs, gun violence. Pre-DS&I. DS&I brought neighbors together and organized and created housing opportunities for regular folks, regular residents who live there. So to me, there are lots of solutions that we should put on the table. And if you're going to come to the working session and be at that table, I think it's important that you offer solutions that have opportunity to get some revenue to help us with the affordability crisis here in the city. If it's not going to be through, it has to be through a fee structure. So if you're just saying, again, with what Councilor Edwards said, if you're saying no fee, then I'm not sure what the point is. But if you're willing to come with something, then I think we're all open to hear and to listen. And then finally, I'm wondering who the little man is who can afford to live in the $2 million luxury unit. So I think it was you, Melvin, who worried about the little man.
Excuse me, what I said was it'll eventually affect the little man. The money will be passed down, the burden will be passed down to them in regards if they're going to rent or do anything else.
So I don't know any little men who are living in the $2 million luxury buildings.
And you're right.
Okay, I just want to be clear about that.
And just, I mean, Melvin, I'm not sure, because you and I talked about this earlier. I mean, if you're talking about a 20-unit building in Roxbury, right, you could probably get pretty close to that $2 million value. Right, and I'm not, and listen, I think there's a focus, you know, you mentioned the single-family homes over $2 million, and I hear your point, right? It's hard to sit here and argue and protect those people, right? But there are people that own buildings in the community you're talking about that have more than one unit in them, 10, 20, 30, 40 units, 50 units if the rents are really low, that cross that threshold. And listen, I've heard about the exclusions on affordable housing or rent restrictions, right? Those are creative solutions to prevent that from happening. But I just think
Is it Travis?
Yeah.
Thank you, Travis. So again, I want to be mindful. We've got a lot of people here. We've been here. It's Michael and I have been here all day. And I know people want to testify. We have other colleagues who want to ask some questions. I would just encourage, in terms of next steps in this process, important to come to the table with some actual solutions and not just roadblocks. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilor Janey. Chair recognizes Councilor Ed Flynn. Keep talking and it'll click on.
What do you see as a possible solution to the housing crisis of working people, immigrants, and low-wage workers?
Yeah, I mean, a quick, short answer is the lower cost production of housing, right? Because I think we said earlier that costs are costs, right? Labor, wood, cost the same whether you're building an affordable unit or a market rate one. Right now, it's very, very, very expensive to build a housing unit in the city of Boston, period. Anywhere of any type. More expensive to build steel, right, than it is to build stick-built. But to solve our housing crisis the way that needs to be solved, you need to build high-density housing, right? Luckily, stick frame zoning has now allowed us to build 5-story stick over 2 levels of podium, right, which could help produce lower cost of housing, right? It's very expensive. I think someone mentioned earlier $400,000 a unit to build in the city of Boston. I would argue that that is low by a significant margin, especially if you move to steel construction. So my initial thoughts would be find tracts of land in the city of Boston, which there are plenty, where you can build lower cost of housing, stick-built, high-density housing at a lower level and charge a more price-appropriate rent. Because at the end of the day, someone's going to need to finance that building, whether it's a bank loan or equity or public funding. And the only way to make the numbers work is to have lower cost equals lower rent, in my opinion.
I know you mentioned the seaport. I'm from South Boston, so we actually call it the South Boston waterfront. Yep. I would love to see some of the South Boston waterfront, the available land used there to be built for affordable housing. I think there's a critical need in that neighborhood for affordable housing. I don't think you can have a neighborhood that's exclusively, for the most part, wealthy. I think you have to have a neighborhood with affordable housing. That's something I'm concerned about and focused on. If you don't support this proposal, is there a tax that you or a fee that you would support to build affordable housing for low-income workers, low-income families, working-class families? What type of fee would you go on record or tax would you go on record in support of?
I think the idea, the concern of this idea is that it is transaction-based and therefore is impacting the market at one particular time, just a certain number of properties, and that can have a distorting effect on the overall market and the economy.
So what type of, is there a fee or a tax that you would support? So that we can build housing for working class families and low income families?
I think fees that are broad-based or equitable, I mean, to use that word, are much preferable to something that's very targeted to just a certain number of transactions a year.
Nothing specific though, right?
Well, we're part of the group that's going to be looking at IDP. You know, so that's definitely.
And the reason I ask it is I represent District 2, South Boston, the South End, Chinatown, almost all of downtown Boston, the waterfront. I don't think there has been more economic development than in my district consistently for the last 15 years. We've built housing, a lot of it very wealthy housing, luxury housing, I should say, and a lot of people did get wealthy off that, including those in the real estate, and that's fine, but why can't we now have an opportunity to give other people a shot at affordable housing? You know, you did well, and I don't use that as a criticism, but now let's give an opportunity for someone that desperately needs a house. Let's work with them so we can build housing for middle-class families or low-income families. You know, let everybody be successful, not just the wealthy.
I 100% agree with you. And listen, I think that what's interesting about, you know, and I don't want to harp on the South Boston waterfront because it seems to be a lightning rod at the moment. I would say a lot of that has to do with zoning. A lot of that has to do with the underlying zoning and the value of the land, right? If the BPDA allows certain projects to be built in a certain area, the market will determine the value of that land and what gets built there, right? So I think if you really want to encourage family housing in a place like South Boston waterfront, the conversation is not with us and our constituents, because I could point to 10 affordable housing developers that I know personally that would love to build a for-sale family project in the South Boston waterfront. But the zoning doesn't exist, the land's not available for sale. Even if it was, it would be too expensive to build. And most likely the height restriction of the height zoning would cause you to build steel, which you could not justify the construction cost of that. So I agree with you 100%, but it's not a question for us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Lynch. You recognize Councilor Campbell. Any questions of this man?
I'll just say thank you. You know, it's always great to have all the varied perspectives, so I appreciate you guys sharing yours today, and just will look forward to the next panel. I want to be mindful of time, so thank you.
One follow-up question.
One follow-up question to Eddie's question about fees that you would support. You did support CPA, didn't you?
On the CPA, when it was proposed, the industry basically sat back and didn't you know.
Well, I was the bone I was going to give you. I thought that was a collective fee.
No, I mean,
I was going to say yes.
Whatever, I tried.
I was going to let you do it. I was going to let you do it. I was going to say yes.
Just to be clear.
Just say yes, Craig.
I did try. I thought that was a collective
Just
one.
say yes, Craig. Like, would it be
when
good?
CPA was put forth in, like, I believe it was like 2000, Fidelity came out and against it. So there was a real concern that the industry was going to do that again.
Right.
Talking to all the members, basically the decision was we would sit back and let the voters decide, and that's basically the position. So I wanted to be clear.
All right.
You know, I appreciate you throwing me the bone,
I thought I was.
but I wanted to be honest, and so the industry, because of the divergence views we had at the table, it was best for us not to say anything and say, hey, leave it up to the voters of Boston to decide. And it turned out the way it did, which was fine.
And just for full edification, because I had a front row seat supporting the CPA, working with, on behalf of the council, working with some of the lead advocates. Fidelity, not only did they come out against it, but they led a fundraising effort throughout the business community in an effort to put commercials and to basically led an effort to defeat it at the ballot versus this time there was a sort of a stand down and more of a willingness to allow CPA to get legs underneath it and to get out throughout the community and to do their grassroots campaign. So we do. I can speak personally to it. I appreciated that. I know the mayor appreciated it, and a lot of the business leaders stepped up to join us at the press conference, along with Maha and other housing advocates, to make sure that it did pass, and it did pass. So we're excited to have it. And to your point, 34 the first round, I think 42 the second round. So there's some good stuff happening in our city on a number of fronts that was a result of CPA. So thank you for your time and attention to this panel. We're going to start our third panel. You're welcome to stick around and listen to another version and opinion on this thing, as well as additional public testimony. So I appreciate your time and attention, gentlemen.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Mr. Chairman, can I just say one more thing? And I just direct this to Councilor Edwards. Councilor Edwards is somebody that I have deep respect for. So I gave her a little bit of a jab, but please take it for what it is. I consider you a friend. and that's not going to change. And sometimes friends jab each other, but I am here to help you and to try to work on these issues, so please don't take that personally. I had an amazing respect for you when I first met you a long time ago when you were working for the city, so that doesn't change. So if I offended you, I'm sorry, but I'm your friend. Please don't forget.
We'll keep talking, and you can come over and have tea anytime. We're friends.
Thank you, Greg. So the next panel will be Hillary Pizer, Chuck Collins, and Steve Meacham, a friend from City Life. And while we're waiting for that panel to come down, I'm going to take some additional public testimony in this order. Ann Moy, Louise Baxter, John Keith, looks like John Kressler, Joe Kressler, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong. If you can just, you have the floor, ma'am. Just state your name and affiliation. You got it. Just keep talking. It's going to...
Oh, okay, sorry. Anne had to leave for a 4 p.m. meeting, so literally just handed her letter to me.
Very good.
So I'm just going to read it out. So the Castle Square Tenants Organization is writing in support of Home Rule Petition Commercial and Investor Real Estate Transfer Fee, sponsored by City Councilor Lydia Edwards and City Councilor Kim Janey. Rents have surged over past decades, pricing low and moderate income citizens out of the market and contributing to displacement and increasing evictions. A 6% transfer fee split between buyers and sellers would generate millions of dollars to help stabilize and increase the number of affordable apartments throughout the city of Boston. The lack of affordable housing is impacting quality of life, contributing to housing insecurity, rent burden, homelessness, and increasing evictions. We support exemptions outlined in home rule petitions, such as first-time home buyers and sales below $2 million. The Neighborhood Housing Trust Fund has a successful track record of increasing the number of affordable and workforce housing in the city, and we agree all proceeds from the Home Rule Petition, Commercial and Investor Real Estate Transfer Fee be dedicated to Neighborhood Housing Trust Fund. Sincerely, Ann Moy, President of the Castle Square Tenants Organization.
Very good, thank you. And I see Louise Baxter. Louise, you're here with us, right? So take your time. Good to see you, Louise. We're going to let Louise, yep, not a problem. Take your time, Louise, and then we're going to go to Jonathan next.
Bowing out, but I'll say one thing. I've been in this city for ages, and I have not, all the more building, I have not seen any more affordable housing. And I say this tax is not really going to hurt the elderly that much. People say that, but most elderly own their house for more than 2 years, except for some of the elderly that are speculators. Because we still have some, like Harold Brown died, 88. He was from the 70s, when we were being displaced from the Fenway area with the rent increases and killing rent control. So I'll say for those developers, I've never seen more development making more affordable housing. It's just more profit for them.
Thank you, Louise.
You're welcome.
Good to see you. John, how are you, John?
First, I have to apologize for losing my temper. It's the first time I've talked to you, Councilor Edwards or Councilor Janey, and I apologize, and President Campbell. If you give me 2 minutes to give my speech, and but I had a thing, and I'll submit it as a. So I live in the South Boston waterfront. I live in a wood frame building. It's the 6th floor, so apparently that's, you know, as high as you can go. But I was in the real estate industry, but I am no longer. I don't consider myself necessarily a friend because I have issues with their point of view or what their interests are or who they're defending or supporting. And I do agree that a lot of, you know, they're not necessarily speaking for the city of Boston. I wouldn't predicate, if that's a word, any decisions on your part based on what the real estate board thinks, because we know there's a conflict of interest. I try to have no conflict of interest. Right now I'm not working, so I don't have a conflict of interest. I'm not in real estate, but I do know the business very well. And in my experience, just because you asked about it, and the specific parts of this meeting were to talk about unintended consequences or things that may happen, I do think if you do the 25% flip tax, that it would just push people to the 25th month. And so you're not really going to get a lot there. I do totally agree, we're talking about, I think we are all talking about the flippers that we don't like.
John, just for clarification, so you're saying like they would just push the closing back to beat the clock?
Yeah, I think so. And then but the trouble is they may leave the units empty for that long. So you're going to have less properties available than you might think you would. And then they'll keep the building empty. Okay, I don't consider them flips because when I did the research, okay, I want to stop because I don't care about all the other stuff, but the data that like the D&D has and everything is great, but like I worked for the Warren Group for 1.5 years. Obviously, that's where everyone gets their deed information. That has everything that we need. It shows you how many were flips, who did it for what reason. It has a list of who the owner-occupants are. It has mortgage information, which is somewhat helpful. But they're like a non-biased group of people, even though I no longer work there and they laid me off. I still support them, and it's where I get all my data. So if there are questions that could supplement what the city has, I don't know if they use them right now, but it would have everything you need. But what I wanted to say about the flippers is when I did my research, the names were people who live in the city or who work in the city, who hire tradesmen and tradeswomen, who hire accountants and real estate agents and everything. So they're your neighbors, and some of them are known to you either by relationship or somebody on the council's relationship. I don't think that they're in it. They're in it for a small business person's profit, not for malicious or malevolent reasons. Real quickly, the unintended and I'm sorry for going on, but unintended for the millionaire's tax is that people will move into the city and become owner-occupants instead of they'll have their wife, for lack of another term, or a husband come here and become the tenant, become the owner-occupant. Number two, it will actually reduce the CPA because people who live in the city who are residents get to take the deduction. It will reduce the available renting stock because these people who are renting out their units will no longer rent them out because they want to pretend or they want to show that they're owner-occupants. And it may incentivize, I've never used that word, people to not buy here because of that 6% tax, which is going to come right off the top. And in my opinion, which they didn't talk about for the real estate, that's going to come from the seller, not from the buyer. No buyer is going to want to buy a property, even if they're a millionaire, and put down 6% or 3% on their side. That's not going to. I'm sorry. Oh God! Oh, I thought you were amazed. This was really a crummy speech, but I do have a lot of thoughts. I'll put it in writing, but I was thrown because, of course, I yelled and I didn't mean to. So I'm sorry about that. Mike, Councilor Flaherty has heard me yell before. So thanks.
Don't worry about it. Good to see you, John. And then, so last call for public testimony from Joe Kressler, Martin Roeder, Betty Lowe, and Eric Harat. So if you've heard your name called, just come to the microphone, offer some brief public testimony, and then we're going to get right into our panel discussion. Okay. Name and affiliation for the record.
Sure. My name is Betty Lowe. I'm a resident, actually, of North Quincy, but I'm on the side of the residents of Boston. I was born and raised in Boston. I went to Josiah Quincy Elementary School. I still go there to swim, actually, on evenings. And I just wanted to comment on some of the remarks that the earlier panels had made. Someone had mentioned, I believe that she was the CFO of Boston. She mentioned tax dodging due to the threshold, which, so there's a trade-off. So she's proposing that there would be a trade-off between tax dollars that we receive and this fee that would be levied. Are those tax dollars being used presently to stabilize communities in Boston? It doesn't sound like, per Sheila, who also spoke earlier, it doesn't sound like there's enough, or she mentioned not even knowing how much the city would need to meet the demands that are that exist right now. Let's see. Somebody else had mentioned that Boston has a very well-educated workforce. Well, I work as an accountant, I have a college degree, so I'm part of that well-educated workforce, but at the same time, I know that we have many service sector jobs. We rely on those service sector jobs. The neighborhoods that somebody else had mentioned on the real estate panel, the areas that are now beautified, they rely on people to keep those streets clean, to keep those properties clean, to maintain the landscaping, to do all sorts of maintenance work, and those are working class people that would be, it seems like the real estate panel is kind of paying lip service to, but not really, they said that we're not building fast enough to meet the demands for affordable housing, and yet they also said that there was this massive boom. They also acknowledged the massive boom in development in the Seaport District, among other parts of Boston. So which is it really? Like, are we not developing fast enough to meet affordable housing needs, actual affordable housing needs, or has the real estate industry been doing enough on its end to develop places like the Seaport? And they also mentioned that the real estate market rises and falls. Well, it doesn't really seem like that happens in Boston. In that, I've been here for 30 some odd years, and real estate prices keep on going up. My parents bought a property actually outside of Boston in the early 90s, and that property has gone up in value. Like it's tripled in value. They bought it for $140,000. It's now worth $500,000, and that's like outside of Boston. So I don't even know, how. Don't even have the figures on how bad it is in Boston. But I also wanted to share one thing with the community members, and a lot of you may have already heard about this, but Right to the City Boston is having a Homes for All assembly this Saturday from 12 p.m. to 4 p.m. I've run up some flyers here that anyone can take, and if you're interested, please join us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anyone else looking to offer public testimony may do so now or forever hold your peace. State your name and affiliation for the record and try to be as brief as possible.
My name is Eric Harrett. I am a resident of Jamaica Plain. First, actually, I did want to emphasize how much importance I think I'm glad that you guys have placed on this issue. I think you've correctly identified the flipping of housing, and that to me is sort of defined as like builder, renovator, developer buys typically small wood frame homes and does some amount of modification to them and then resells them for significantly more than they previously were worth to a completely different economic class of buyer, if you will. I think that's actually the bulk of where the displacement that happens in Boston comes from, so I think it's great that we're talking about it. I am at least a little bit concerned in the original version of the proposal, as many other people in this conversation mentioned about sort of second order unintended consequences. The first one that kind of came to mind to me was that a lot of the units that are probably causing most of this displacement will probably never meet the $2 million threshold. So a lot of people have mentioned about graduated thresholds. I think that's probably a good idea to consider. I also am a little concerned that so much of the money that we're trying to raise to pay for affordable housing essentially comes from other housing. So at the time that I feel like one of our major concerns is that we're witnessing an increasingly stratified housing market where we essentially have two kinds of housing now. We have housing that is built, is deed restricted by the city, and it meets the needs of people making 70% AMI or below. And housing meeting the needs of people at like 150 to 2 plus AMI, but nothing in between. And I worry that taxes on new housing kind of further add to that problem. So although I disagree with a lot of the things that our friends from the real estate board said here, I would definitely encourage people to consider a broader-based tax as a way to pay for affordable housing, precisely because of the concern of how it will affect sale prices. And I also think it's definitely a legitimate concern that a lot of the cliffs, thresholds, timelines in this bill are likely to just cause people to hold houses for longer. I know that a lot of the flips I've seen on my own street, they typically take, it seems, based on the state of the paint and the contractors parked out in front of the place, somewhere between 12 and 18 months. So it doesn't seem completely unimaginable to me that they would hold it for another 6 if that meant avoiding the penalty. I just wanted to give a shout out. I think one thing that I think really, things that would probably make a significant impact here in particular in terms of avoiding displacement Because it seems to me one of the purposes of this tax is actually not so much that people will pay it, but that it will discourage people from doing the things that we penalize in the first place. I'm not convinced this tax necessarily is going to be that effective at doing that in a lot of places. But one thing that you guys have talked about that I think would be absolutely effective there is this right to counsel. And I just want to give that a shout out. I think it's totally awesome, and I would 100% support it. So,
Good. Thank you, Eric. Appreciate it. Martin, how are you? Good to see you again.
Yes, I'm Martin Rota. I live in the Back Bay. I'm currently chairman of the Neighborhood Association of the Back Bay, but I'm not speaking on behalf of the residents or the members of NAB, but myself. I came here to learn a lot so that we can have our own discussions and figure out what to do. And I'd like to make a few observations about what I've heard today. I think I leave today more confused than I was when I came in, but at the same time, I appreciate very much the statement of the problem. And the problem, of course, is, I think, much broader than just housing. It has to do with affordable living, and that includes many other things than housing. It includes education and healthcare, for example. And we have an increasingly perverted economy in this country and in a few other countries in which somehow nothing increases very much like median incomes, but these other, and these are the three categories I've focused on, which are kind of important to the quality of life that we have, seem to be going up without any way of stopping their increases. The concern about this is that over time, and I've talked to people who've lived in the Back Bay for a long, long time, and they tell me, you know, a long time ago, actually, Back Bay was itself was a lot more affordable for a lot more people than it is now. So in a sense, in a neighborhood such as the Back Bay, we're kind of trying to close the barn door after the horse has gone away, or you might say we're trying to open the front door after it's already become far too expensive to get in. And there are other neighborhoods in Boston, and we've been working with them on some other matters, like the short-term rental ordinance, where we've become aware, much more aware of the problems that they face. Now, a couple of other just observations. One is, we've heard talk about unintended consequences or what might be the result of this tax. And I'm concerned about the naivete of some of those thoughts, because typically what people do is you focus upon the immediate, directly likely consequence of something that happens. But often it's not the first order effect, but even the second or third order effects that are much more important. So it seems that some people think that reduction in the value of real estate is a bad thing. I would have thought it's a good thing in terms of affordability, and it may make some businesses, and we talk to business owners who say, gee, one of the things that I can't afford to do any longer is run my business or found a business in this area because the cost of rent or whatever is too high. So anything that enables that cost to come down would be a good thing. The other concern I've heard expressed is, well, you know, if you put in a tax, there are going to be people who come around with all kinds of brilliant, very clever tax avoidance schemes. Well, of course they will. A lot of activity in this country is based upon tax avoidance. Some of it may be into the illegal, and there's some very wealthy lawyers who earn a lot of money doing that. So I would say that what we need to make sure is, if I can misquote the Bible, yea, though I walk through the valley of tax avoidance schemes, I will have no fear, because I've got the smartest and the meanest lawyers on my side. And I hope that somehow we can manage to make that part of the way in which whatever scheme is implemented, and I understand there may be ways in which what's been proposed up to now needs to be adjusted, whatever scheme is implemented, we are, as they say in Boston, wicked piss of smart in the way in which we actually implement and enforce it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Martin. My grandmother was a bootlegger. I think it was a lot easier to be a bootlegger.
Yeah, well, you need to bring some humor into it because it's such a serious subject.
Great. And Joe Kresberg is Joe. Last call for Joe. And if Joe is not here, is there additional public testimony? So anyone else wishing to offer public testimony may do so now. We're going to close up public testimony. We're going to get right into our panel. I'm excited to hear from the panel. Go ahead, sir.
Good afternoon. Thank you for your time. Kyle Smith, resident of Jamaica Plain, and know Eric very well. One thing I have not heard much of is related to owner occupancy. We should also be trying to promote owner-occupied units as opposed to investment units. As I'm sure you know, there was a study of about a dozen or so of these kind of luxury high-rise buildings, and they found out that a vast majority of those, or a significant number, 30+%, were what could amount to kind of tax havens or havens for funds here. So I would just have you also look into owner occupancy as a potential justification for exemption or in the scaling. So.
As a point of clarification, owner-occupant units are exempt from this.
Okay,
They
in the
are.
purchase and the sale.
If they're going to an owner-occupant.
Got it. Okay.
So if that's not clear, we can make that clear.
I did not see that in here, but thank you.
Yeah, we can make that more clear, but
Okay.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So that'll conclude public testimony. We're going
Thank
to go
you.
to our next panel. I guess we'll start with Hillary. We have Hillary, we have Jen Woodford, and Steve Meacham. So I'll defer to you guys as to who goes first, but good, thank you. Go ahead.
Hi. Thank you for having me.
Yep, just keep talking, Hillary, it'll click on.
All right. I'm submitting this testimony on behalf of MAHA, the Mass Affordable Housing Alliance. And first, I want to say I appreciate the councilors Edwards and Janey. Your sense of urgency is refreshing. We need to do something that is much bigger than what we are doing now. I am in the trenches on linkage, on CPA match, on IDP. I was there with Councilor Flaherty in 2001 on CPA. And all of those victories are great. MAHA is will graduate 1,800 new first-time home buyers into the Boston market this year.
Awesome.
There is almost nothing that any of them can afford. They have to, A, win the lottery, literally, either the Megabucks or the DND lottery. They have to hope and pray that their rent isn't going up again and again and again and try to hang on, or they have to move very far away from the city. A good portion of our folks are in the, say, $45,000 to $65,000 income range, decent salaries, good credit. They could be homeowners in a different market. I'm old enough that I've seen many people at lesser incomes, even adjusted for the time, owning homes. The first benefit of that is just mental health. The stress of being a renter in this city right now is unbelievable, and it goes from stressful to an emergency situation anytime your landlord walks in with a literally $1,000 rent increase overnight, and I know Steve will talk to this more, but it's affecting our, we're often seen as different constituencies. They're the same constituency. Why are so many people still taking our class even though they can't afford to buy? Because they can't afford to rent. They're hoping that this is a way out. And it's my job to try to help them help themselves by getting involved in issues like this. So I will say that we strongly support this, agree with all of you up there and other people who are saying we need to figure out all the unintended consequences and try to adjust it. But we need this money. Every time we talk about doing something major, we're being told, we're on your side, we love to help you, we just don't have the money. So the 2030 housing plan is awesome. It's a big undertaking, but we need to do much more than that because our people are leaving in droves. And by the time we get to that plan, we went from about 62 owner-occupant affordable houses created in 2017 to 190-something last year. So that's a big increase. But I repeat, we're graduating 1,800 first-time homebuyers this year, and we are not the only agency. So we will do whatever we can to work with you on refining this proposal, but we need to swing big. And so we're open to whatever you all need us to do, both here, and we're very mindful that the city may not be the biggest hurdle. And we want to strategize with you and other city councilors, Councilor Flaherty, others we know have ties to the State House, have relationships with folks at the State House. We need to get the sense of urgency. It's hard to be urgent at 4:45, especially when you guys have been here from the early morning, but I'm going back to our members and they feel the urgency, and so it drives me to try to do something about this. I will also say 75% of our graduates consistently over the years are people of color. The homeownership rate for white households in Boston is 44%. For black households, it's 29%. For Asian households, it's 26%. For Latino households, it is a measly 16%. That's deplorable. We need to do something about that, and a lot of these folks are making good incomes, have good credit. They need something they can afford. Yes, affordable development is the holy grail, right? Why does it cost $250 in Norwood to build the same thing that it costs $450 or $500,000 in Boston to build? I don't know. That boggles my mind, and we need to address it. But in the meanwhile, we're going to need more money, and we need it fast. So thank you so much for this opportunity and for raising this issue.
Thank you, Hillary. Jen? Welcome.
Thank you so much. Jennifer Wofford. I'm with the Institute for Policy Studies, and forgive me, I'm going to fill in for Chuck Collins, who's our director. Chuck Collins is the founder of the program on inequality, working on economic inequality at the Institute for Policy Studies, and IPS is a long-time national progressive think tank based in Washington, founded by some wonderful people, one of whom, Marcus Raskin, died this past year, but had been a real hero. So a couple quick things. I'm going to try to touch on the highlights from Chuck's testimony that would address what's happening in other cities that's important and relevant to Boston. And then I'm going to dive in briefly on what's happening in Massachusetts on this issue on real estate transfer tax and transfer fees, because that might be of most use for you guys. And I want to say thank you very much, Councilor Edwards and Councilor Janey, for this incredibly important and bold step forward. And thank you, Councilor Flaherty, for chairing this meeting. And one thing that Councilor Edwards said is right on target, that we 100% agree with, that I think Hillary agrees with, everybody agrees with. We need to keep the non-wealthy here in Boston, not lose people. And you talked about particularly resources that exist that we need another tool in addition to. You have the acquisition opportunity, home buyers, but people can't buy their way in if we don't help them. And one thing that Councilor Janey referred to is the Neighborhood Trust Fund. And so these are important tools, but the key metric that we want to say that we're in cahoots with you guys on is there needs to be permanently affordable housing, not just a temporary little fix that goes away. And the funding streams that can support permanently affordable housing, it can be public housing, nonprofit, ventures, deed-restricted, co-op, home ownership, various things like that. The full report, Towering Excess, which looked at luxury real estate in Boston, is on the IPS website. It's like 42 pages. I didn't bring it, but we had the honor of meeting with the councilors and with all of your staff. If we didn't see you, Councilor Flaherty, and particularly we met with your staff to go through the report. And in relation to something that the man who spoke very most recently with the accent,
Martin Ruder.
That what he was saying, that's one aspect that is super important, which is the accountability and oversight over the properties where there's no transparency. So what we found in Boston is that 2/3 of the luxury properties in Boston were not claiming the residential exemption. That doesn't mean that they're definitely not living there, but they're not claiming residential exemption. And then 1/3 were purchased by shell corporations, LLCs, most of which are registered in Delaware, which is easier to open a shell corporation in Delaware than it is to get a library card in Massachusetts. Easier. So to his point about the shell corporations, yes, there needs to be more investigation into that. So let me quickly go over, and in fact, on the avoidance issue, which the real estate panel was speaking about, the only avoidance has come up with LLCs and shell corporations, in particular in San Francisco, the commercial ones. That's where they play games and have their lawyers. But if it's not purchased by a shell corporation LLC, it's far easier to keep accountability. The big highlights in San Francisco, and to give the key overall message is, the time has come, and you guys are on it. and you're on the energy that has been building for a number of years. So you'll hear dates that just go really recently. These are not 20 years ago, but this is a wave that's sweeping that we think is a good wave to address economic inequality, to address the urgent need for affordable housing. So I want to support the work you're doing with some quick stats. San Francisco in 2016, by ballot initiative, a real estate transfer tax on properties that sold for over $5 million. So between $5 to $10 million, they pay $11.25 for every $500, which is a drastic difference between properties that are between $1 million and $5 million are taxed at $3.75 per $500 value. It's expected to exceed $44 million. They're putting it primarily to city college tuition, expenses of residents, but also infrastructure such as trees. Now that may sound silly, but it's not. And this goes to the governor's proposal to tax real estate to fund climate change global solutions trust fund, which is that I've found this out from the Nature Conservancy and their excellent work they're doing in Dorchester. When you plant trees, it addresses heat and water, which are the two problems coming at us with climate change. So trees matter. San Francisco is using a big chunk of their real estate transfer tax to put a ton of trees in the city, because what happens in a city is we build every little tiny section and there's no trees left. The update is the assessor's report out of San Francisco reported that in their 2016 to 17 fiscal year, they say the highest level of transfer tax collections at $411 million. And that include revenue in particular from Prop W, the luxury transfer tax on the $5 million and up, which was responsible for an additional $22 million in revenue alone. Commercial transactions were 14% of that total, but 57% of the revenue of transfer tax. Oakland and Berkeley have quickly followed suit. Oakland previously had a flat real estate tax of 1.5%. They are now doing, they've lowered it to 1% on home values up to $300,000, right? Better for low-income people. You can finally buy in. You're not going to be hit hard. 1.5% on values between properties $300,000 to $2 million. 1.75% for $2 million to $5 million, and 2.5% on property valued over $5 million into the general fund. Berkeley has put in a two-tier tax rate. Similar. Vermont and Connecticut, here's what's important. Well, I'll do this first. Vermont and Connecticut have progressive transfer taxes on real estate transactions. Vermont's goes into the Housing Conservation Board that invests in permanently affordable housing and farmland conservation. In Connecticut, the states and municipalities have tax authority, and they collected $186.6 million in state tax revenue. Municipalities collected $52.4 million in Connecticut. New York City, as you mentioned earlier, has the mansion tax in 1989, 1% on properties over $1 million, paid by the buyer unless the buyer can claim exemption and meet the exempt criteria, in which case it's paid by the seller. They've added also, well, they're considering increasing it to 1.5% on properties that are over $5 million. They are now putting in the city, through enabling legislation like you guys with the state, are close to instituting a luxury second home tax called the pied-à-terre. Pied-à-terre? I don't know how to say it. So that would say that if you are going to buy a second property in the millions and millions of dollars, you need to pay a bigger fee. Quickly, these are very similar to Vancouver, Hong Kong, Paris, London in levying very high luxury second home property taxes. British Columbia has a foreign buyers tax. They also have an empty homes tax. And we were honored to assist Councillor Matt O'Malley's office in connecting with Vancouver when he was out there in order to gain direct information from their treasurer office, assessor's office, and state government and city government. New Jersey has two additional transfer taxes. The first applies to non-residents of New Jersey. They are subject to a 2% tax on the sales price. In addition, they have a millionaire's tax for homes selling over $1 million or subject to 1% on the sales price paid by the buyer. There are breaks and exemptions for senior citizens, et cetera. Hawaii in November 2018, voters passed an amendment for luxury real estate. Then in addition, there's some more on vacant properties that you'll see in Washington, D.C. in order to address the ones that are unoccupied, vacant, and blighted have put in an additional tax. Vacant properties are taxed at $5 per $100 value. And if the property is blighted in additional, it's a $10 per $100 value. That's to fund permanently affordable housing. Vancouver, 2017, empty homes tax. Melbourne, Australia, 2017, vacant residential property tax, again going after the luxury. Paris, France. New York has an empty commercial properties tax. And San Francisco has an annual flat fee on properties that remain unoccupied for 6 months or more. And as your friend earlier mentioned, yes, you do have to have good lawyers because someone could put a goldfish in their $6 million property and say that it is occupied. So you have to have good lawyers who draft the language. But the reason people are doing this, bigger picture, and then we'll go to Massachusetts, the reason they're doing this is they are taking enormous wealth. We have gotten shockingly, astronomically divided between the rich and the poor, back to the era of the 20s. It's gotten worse and worse and worse and worse and worse every year, and we're in a really downhill spiral, particularly with Trump's tax cuts, as you guys know very well. So the reason folks are doing this is they have tremendous wealth, and they don't want to invest it in the stock market. They want to just park it in property that they think they can flip and get more money later. So they're not using it as a home. They're not registering to live there. They're not claiming an exemption. Think of it as the new global capital, but instead of sending your money offshore, you buy property in Boston and you just sink $6 million in there. One thing that was super important that you guys did that we're very grateful for is your work on this issue already with the city, already triggered the Treasury Department's FinCEN, Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, which had been missing, and we were very honored to speak with you about that because in Miami, when Miami said, wait a minute, we've got a ton of cash purchases in the multi-millions. Can you imagine a cash purchase of $6 million by an LLC? What's going on? Is this dirty money? Is this money laundering? Treasury Department investigated. A lot of it dried up in Miami. So you guys, in your already work, that's already happened is you were able to bring forward the Treasury Department to start taking a closer look. When it's an LLC cash purchase, what is going on? Is it Russian money? Is it drug money? It's not good. So here's on Massachusetts. And it starts on page 8. And I apologize that the way we copied it, it's a little confusing. But if you turn to page 8, that's actually the first page. And one would wish that it flowed naturally, but it doesn't, so I apologize for that. Here's what's happening in Massachusetts. There is very much some urgency and a momentum. So there are over 7 transfer tax bills. And I'll just very quickly describe them and answer any questions you have. I know much more about Massachusetts than I know about other cities. Chuck did the report and is the more knowledgeable one on other cities. In Massachusetts, so Representative Liz Malia of Boston and Senator Joe Comerford of Western Mass put in an act establishing local options for generating affordable housing money. It's been assigned to revenue. That one, they attempted in their efforts to match up with yours. So what they did is they said the cities and towns have the option to levy a transfer tax of between 0.5% up to 2% on luxury property sales, which is defined as 300% of median sales price per square foot or 300% of median sales per acre. That means it's 3 times the price per square foot in a town or city, 3 times the price per square acre in Western Mass. So you can't say, well, it's a teeny tiny property on a gorgeous estate in the Berkshires. So what that bill would do, if it were to happen, House 2552, is it would in Boston equate with properties that are 2.007 million, so it matches up with yours. In Martha's Vineyard, it's a higher amount. In Franklin County, it's like 600,000. So it goes to the county. It doesn't say everyone's buying 2 million. What's happening in this town? Where's the upper echelon? Right. Then there is the bill introduced again by Representative Connolly and Senator Boncour, which has been introduced before. It's in municipalities, H 1769. Again, it's a local option for a fee on certain real estate transactions. That one is very similar. It's 0.5% up to 2% on all property sales, but it doesn't go after just the luxury. Everyone has to pay it, although cities and towns can create exemptions. So you can create an exemption based on percent of AMI, so you could exempt seniors, you could exempt low-income folks. So that's another bill. Then you've got 2457, Representative Dylan Fernandez put one in, an act empowering cities and towns to impose a fee on home sales over $1 million. So that is 2% tax paid by the purchaser, collected and managed by the city. Again, like all the other ones, I should have specified this, all the funds go to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, or in the case of Liz Malia's bill, if there is not an Affordable Housing Trust Fund, then it goes to the CPA fund. So Dylan Fernandez's bill, it goes to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. Again, it's just $1 million and up. And if there is no such trust fund, it goes to the state Affordable Housing Trust Fund. Somerville has a home rule petition, very similar to yours, a fee on the transfer, 1% on the purchaser, 1% on the buyer, so the buyer and seller. And then you've got two bills specific to CPA, Community Preservation Act. Senator Cynthia Cream's bill 1618 is seen as a much needed, long overdue fix for this Community Preservation Act. And it is a deeds, it's a fee, increasing the fee on the recordation fee of deeds and municipal liens in order to fund specifically the Community Preservation Act. The only caveat just to share is that, as you well know, 175 towns have the Community Preservation Act, which is not all. So 60% of Massachusetts residents are in a town where there's a Community Preservation Act fund, but there are many that do not have one. The other thing to specify is that most only require 10% to go to affordable housing. The rest, it can go to public parks, it can go to historic preservation, it can go to buildings, beautification. Then there's another bill related to CPA, and that's Cutler and Keenan's bill, H2429. That one specifically goes more to the county government as a way to fund regional services with a 15% carve out for the Community Preservation Trust Fund. And then there's the governor's proposal. This surprised housing groups and this surprised environmental groups. Yeah. No one saw this coming. We had a meeting with all the environmental groups. They had no idea this was coming either. And what he did is he said, let's take the deeds excise tax. Let's raise the deeds excise tax. Here's what's interesting about the deeds excise tax, and I'm sorry I'm speaking so much, but this is important to share. The deeds excise tax has not been raised in 50 years. It was established in 1969 at $4.56. It hasn't raised. What's important to note is that surrounding towns, cities, sorry, and states have much higher deeds excise. Ours has been stuck at $4.56 per thousand since inception. Connecticut is $10.50. New York and Vermont are $12.50. So even if you were to double the deeds excise tax, so the governor's not doubling, he's doing not quite double, so a quarter of it, but if you were to double it, you would still be below the state of Connecticut, below New York and Vermont, significantly. He's saying, let's raise the deeds excise tax with 0.02%, $2 for $500 value, and up to $3 per $500 value paid by the seller. And that would go to the, I want to get it correct, it's the Global Warming Solutions Trust Fund. And they estimate $75 million in FY 2020, growing to $137 million annually. So we had a meeting that I want to share with you guys with the environmental organizations who are all quite open to saying, geez, yeah, this is a real estate transfer tax. Some should go to housing. We agree. So the current thinking that everyone likes, and I think your friends in the real estate industry might agree, that the deeds excise tax, because it's a flat fee rather than a percent, it's graduated. So it's progressive, but rather than a percent, they don't like percent, as I understand in my limited knowledge of real estate, they don't like percent taxes because they feel it might cut into their percent commission. That's my understanding. But they feel better, apparently, or they fight less aggressively against a deeds excise tax. So the governor's bill, if you were to double it, you're still below Connecticut, below New York and Vermont, and you have the ability to say, hey, big chunk for global solutions, climate change, you know, maybe 40%, big chunk for affordable housing, maybe 40%, and then fund CPA, Community Preservation Act, long overdue. So that's a very interesting development in terms of what's happening right now in conversations that really matter among your colleagues in the State House and elsewhere. So that's a whole lot of detail. Sorry for all of that detail, and I'm incredibly grateful for your time and all of your hard work and your bold courageousness.
Hi, my name is Steve Meacham, and We're the only two councilors left, so I want to thank you for your leadership on this issue and appreciate you staying till the end. I also appreciate all the councilors who have been here. I'm here today representing City Life Vita Urbana. We do tenant organizing and organizing to protect homeowners who are faced with eviction after foreclosure all over the city. I'm also here today representing Right to the City Boston, which has organizations involved that represent all the different diverse neighborhoods of the city of Boston. I think somehow, listening to that statistic on how many of the sales that would have been captured by the 25%, and that there were just 550 that would have been captured, apparently we happen to live in all the neighborhoods where those 550 properties are, because that's what we're seeing. Right. We're seeing dramatic increases in prices, in land values. Now, sometimes it takes the form, most often it takes the form of secondary sales, which is what you're trying to get at. Sometimes it takes the form of somebody speculating on their initial sale, on their initial purchase, and then that doesn't work, so they dump it to somebody. So I recognize that happens too sometimes. The speculation is in the first purchase, not just in the second. But we are seeing dramatic increases in value that are driving people out. I have to say that I want to just take this moment to express some frustration of my own that's similar to what you said, Councilor Edwards, which is, I've been at City Life for 20 years, and I've been in a lot of meetings with the real estate industry, in a lot of different offices over that time, on a lot of different proposals that are very diverse. And in each one, we have a statement from the other side that says, we all agree that there's a crisis, but. And each time it was, we can't do this thing that you're proposing. So I really agree with what you said, that that's been the pattern. And it's been very frustrating to deal with that. Most recently, the Jim Brooks Act, which, after all, let us remember, only asked that tenants should know their rights under existing state law. And that was shot down. So I think that has to be part of the context here. So understanding that, I think I wanted to close just speaking a little bit more personally about the crisis. Because even though everybody here is saying, we all agree there's a crisis, but I think for that reason it's important just to state again that's a couple of things about the nature of the crisis we're facing. We have weekly meetings at City Life, one in JP and one in East Boston, that together attract over 100 people each week who are faced with displacement. So about the number of people who are in this chamber today come to City Life meetings every week faced with displacement. That is a heck of a lot of people coming into our office. We hear tear-jerking testimonies every single week. Most of those people who are in our office, in our meetings, are facing no-fault evictions. And just to remember for the record, that's legal in Massachusetts. They are facing no-fault evictions through dramatic rent increases or building clearouts. Those people are, the experience of those evictions, or even just the more widespread fear of those evictions, even before they happen, dramatically affect people's health, mental health, and physical health. They are the externalities, you might say, that the real estate industry doesn't do anything about when they generate them in order to take the profits that they take from real estate. The crisis involves an understanding that new construction of high-end units, even new construction of high-end units that have an inclusionary development program component, that new construction, for instance, up and down the Washington Street corridor in JP, is raising all the surrounding rents. Those rents aren't going down like the real estate industry likes to say, you know, geez, if you just build more of any kind of housing, it will reduce rents. Everybody knows that's not what's happening. So our crisis that we experience all over the city is that as neighborhoods flip, that new construction creates more demand than it solves. It brings more people in, high-end people who are willing to pay more, and drives our people out. So all that says, in order to do something about that, we need to get buildings out of the market, and that takes money. It takes, I think you're right, Councilor Edwards, a lot more money than the city has right now. Yeah. We need to get buildings out of the market. We need to get buildings aggressively out of the market when they're being sold, because all these crises of eviction tend to happen at the point of sale, the point where we should have money in the public sphere to create an alternative buyer rather than a speculator. That's what we need, and that takes money. And even once we have the buildings, we need money to subsidize rents from that 70% of income, like you were saying, down to what's really affordable. After all, let's not forget that the median income of a Boston renter is about $36,000 a year, I think. That would allow you to afford $900 for rent plus utilities. $900. So most affordable housing will have to be further subsidized to get to what our members need to live. That takes money. This is a source of money. And it's an important, large, up-to-scale source of money. Finally, I just want to say that a lot of the displacement that we are facing, a lot of the displacement that our members are facing, come from all of their effort and all of their tax money to create improvements in their neighborhood. I know I've testified to this before, but since we're talking about the crisis, I want to close with this, how important it is to understand that people aren't just being forced out for unknown causes. They're being forced out because they themselves helped create those new stops on the Fairmont line. Their tax money helped create those new stops, and now they're being driven out. The stops are wonderful, but the real estate speculation all around the stops isn't so wonderful. And so to have a bill like this that tries to both raise significant money, number one, and number two, discourage speculation is really important. And in fact, something that discourages speculation will make it easier to buy the buildings because it will, like as that gentleman said, one of the last public testimony, because it will limit the appreciation in property values and make it more possible to buy. So thank you for listening to that end, and as the closing person, I want to thank you again for your attention and your leadership on this issue.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So last call for public testimony. Are you so moved, sir, to come down and say something? Okay, just saw you move, that's all. Not moved to say something. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and let my colleague, Councilor Janey, if you'd have any closing remarks.
Yep. Yes, please. So, one, I just want to thank you for the amazing work that each of you do. It is so important in helping us really understand these issues, but more importantly, helping to protect the residents that live in our city that we're each fighting for in our communities. I'd be interested in what your thoughts are on how this proposal would impact any one of you flipping or speculation in the city. And then that's really it for me. I want to really appreciate not just your work, but your time.
I could just comment this, that I don't know how the 24-month period was set, but I think most flippers have a timeline in mind that's much shorter than that. I mean, the people that we're dealing with who clear out buildings as soon as they buy it, or they demand to clear out before they buy it, they don't want to hold those buildings for anywhere near 24 months. Mm-hmm. They're looking to do something fast and get out. And in fact, we know that partly because our ability to resist that really gives us the leverage to negotiate. So I think that something that says that there's a significant possible tax for flipping within 24 months would have a significant effect.
Anyone else?
I would just say in terms of the money piece of this and the luxury, when we hear the real estate industry, they talk about how our people are the ones that are going to be hurt, but the rents are not set based on cost. They're set based on how much can I get. And same with the prices. So I don't really buy that argument that it's going to trickle down. I think it's taxing the appropriate parties for the appropriate use.
Thank you. That's it for me. Again, thank you so much for all
of
your work. And
much.
thank you everyone who stuck with us through this hearing.
I just had a quick follow-up, and you don't have to answer this now, but it would be great, in as much as we're going to be setting a working session, and we will, where we're going further into this, and there's some carve-outs that we did forget, and I'll acknowledge that for some of our affordable housing developers, if they were to purchase a building over $2 million, they would be hit with this fee. So that's something we certainly want to make sure that there's an exemption if you're in the business of affordable housing, that you shouldn't be paying the transfer fee. We also want to make sure, just working with you, other exemptions that we should make sure that we also consider. I do and would like your thoughts on a graduated fee. I think that there's some people who think that that's a better balance to really make sure that, someone who holds on, flips in 30 days versus someone who maybe flips in 24 months, why are we treating them the same? Why are we acting as though this person is doing as much damage to a community as another person? If they're 30 days, they're flipping and moving as fast as possible. There's also other exemptions that might incentivize not passing down to the tenants, whether that's some form of stabilization of the rent. So if I agree to purchase this building for over $2 million and it has tenants in it, but I've agreed to follow what is, I think, City Life's normal, they have a kind of an agreement that allows for 3% increases on an annual basis. So just in case anyone's ever curious, City Life does acknowledge costs go up. They allow for a 3% increase in the rent. So if I were to say I'm going to agree to that 3% increase in the rent, and work with the tenants, if I'm willing to do that, then maybe there should be a waiver in my being assessed a 6% fee, so I do not do that. So I'm looking for the same flexibility from you that we're asking from the real estate industry. Graduated exemptions that make sense, incentives that make sense, that help make this a more balanced bill. This is a draft. As I said before, I meant it. You are the experts in displacement. You are the experts in the working people and the struggle here in Boston. So I'm so happy that you came here, and I'm so grateful for your expertise. With that, I am going to close out this hearing on go ahead, you can bang it, 0187. Thank you very much.
Thank you.